The first item of business is called to order. If Peggy Atwell will call the roll, please.
Thank you. Chair Wasserman,
Here.
Vice Chair Halstead.
She just left and will be stepping right back in.
Okay. Commissioner Adiego. Here. Commissioner Alvarado.
Here.
Commissioner Butt. Here. Commissioner Gilmore. Here. Commissioner Sharp. Here. Commissioner Pemberton. Here. Commissioner McGrath. Present. Commissioner Peskin. Commissioner Nelson. Commissioner Sears. Here. Commissioner Showalter. Here. Commissioner Vasquez. Here. Commissioner McElhaney.
Here.
Commissioner Teckel. Commissioner Wagenknecht. Commissioner Holtzman.
Here.
Have I missed anybody? Randall?
Pine.
Pine. Commissioner Pine. Gotcha. Okay.
Did we not have Pine up?
We have 19.
There, what I was counting. 19.
We have a quorum. We can conduct business. Thank you. The next item is public comment period. These are items that are people who wish to address items that are not on our agenda today, and you will be limited to 3 minutes. The first is Chad Otter.
Good afternoon. My name is Chad Otten, and I'm here to briefly address the proposed Marriott Residence Inn planned development at Harbor Bay Business Isle in Alameda, California. It's come to our recent understanding that this commission will not be having any oversight or require any permit for this proposed development. 2 years ago, there was another hotel planned here, and with the guidance and the oversight of the commission, that hotel's use was denied simply because it was immediately on the shoreline, inapplicable, and oversized. This planned hotel is scaled to be twice the size of the prior hotel. This hotel will be 5 stories high, 172 rooms on a insufficient parcel that is immediately next to, well, one, the ferry terminal and all the residential neighborhoods. There is no other facility, whether it be a hotel or office building, anywhere in the business park or nearby that comes anywhere close to the scale or to the height of the existing building that's being planned. There is and so I wish, I would like to know why the commission will not be having closer oversight and require a permit for something of this magnitude, twice the size of the prior hotel. And if so, then we would like to work with you on it. Secondly, BCDC had oversight over some simple parking.
You have 1 minute, sir.
Okay, thank you. Had some oversight on some simple parking that was proposed, and BCDC denied that because of the view. Again, with the setbacks and the height of this thing and the scale, it's just completely inappropriate, let alone the impact it's going to have on traffic, crime. It's a use that's going to be going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, as opposed to a business park where it just operates during the weekday. So I would wish the commission would consider requiring a permit and having greater oversight so that they can help the community get an appropriate development at this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Otten. We will take note of your comments. The commission and staff cannot respond to matters in public comment period because they have not been agendized, but we will take note of your comments. Thank you. The next speaker is Rayla Graber. Graber. This is a problem of my reading handwriting.
No,
I apologize.
my handwriting. I'm here also because of the proposed 5-story, 73-foot tall Marriott Hotel on perhaps the finest remaining shoreline in the Bay Area and certainly in the city of Alameda. This area is enjoyed by hundreds, if not thousands of people every year who walk and bicycle there. It is also a sensitive environment habitat with many birds and wildlife that forage there. If built, Alameda has nothing on the bay that is this high a building. It will be seen for miles. It is totally out of scale with everything that's surrounding it, including the adjacent office buildings. We are here, group of us, to urge you, the commissioners, to do the right thing here, as required by state law, and direct your BCDC staff to require a permit for this major and massive project. Yesterday, I was shocked to learn from Wilma Chan's office that the BCDC legal staff had already made a decision not to require a permit from the owner of the proposed hotel. I was shocked because I've had at least 2 extended conversations with your counsel, your legal counsel, by phone as recently as last Wednesday, when he assured me that no decision had been made and that he would know more in 1 week. Now, however, I've learned that around Thanksgiving, the legal staff had already decided upon a course of action, which is not to require a permit, but to merely engage with the developer in a side agreement, such as BCDC formerly had with HBIA. This developer is a third-party or second-party successor, and according to your own documentation, as he is not HBIA, he is not legally entitled to such a side agreement. Okay, thank you. Just last evening, there was a Harbor Bay Homeowners Association meeting in Alameda, which is near the project, representing 2,900 homes and 9,000 Alameda adults. When I say adults, I know there's 9,000 voters in that area. At the end of the meeting, the board went on record with a resolution against the Marriott Hotel, saying it was too large in scale for the area and would negatively impact our neighborhoods and the environment. Additionally, the president of the board said that BCDC would be weighing in on this and that BCDC would be there to protect our shoreline. Please prove our board president is right on this, do the right thing, and require a permit for this massive project, which will greatly affect our shoreline, that you are obligated to protect and preserve. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Joe Ernst.
Chair Wasserman, members of the Commission, I appreciate the opportunity to speak. My name is Joe Ernst. I'm with SRM Ernst Development. I'm also here to speak on the item regarding Harbor Bay. I come to you as an active developer having over 20 years experience in this business park. I'm the president of the Business Park Owners Association. I've been in that role for 15 years, and I am part owner of the parcel in question here. We are not the applicant, but we are the owner. So these roles, this history gives us a lot of intimate working knowledge with the various documents that govern the shoreline. I believe the authors of the letters and the speakers you've just heard from are reaching out based on their experience with the other hotel application, which was on a different site. It was not on this site, and for reasons which I'll describe, had a very different set of circumstances and rules governing that parcel. But in short, this parcel in question is within, parts of it are within the 100-foot band. And these parcels have been under jurisdiction of a series of agreements that go back to the 1980s, go back to when the original Harbor Bay Isle was filled, and there is language in the agreements, paragraph 19, where subsequent owners to the original master developer do benefit from the provisions. And in that time, over 30 years, with the exception of the health club, all development along the 4 miles of shoreline have been developed according to these agreements without permit, but according to these standards. And again, I make that statement based on, again, this 30 years of experience. We've had 3 projects of our own that we've had approved under these agreements, and have worked with staff and have documented that over a period of 12 years. The parcel in question has received 2 approval letters recently, and as one of the previous speakers mentioned, these agreements, these approvals are being memorialized in an agreement. And we've even gone back to one of the former executive directors, Mike Wilmer, who was in place when a lot of these original agreements were created. The differences here with the other parcel in question are quite different. That parcel required a use change, which had to be memorialized in these agreements. This parcel does not. That parcel had some encroachment issues on the public space, which that public access had not yet been created, and that land had not yet been dedicated to the city. Very different here. All of this public access and land has been created. So again, I want to thank you for your time. The City of Alameda's Planning Board is taking this up next week and to make the determination that this project does comply with the development standards and agreements. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Patricia Lamborn.
Good afternoon, BCDC Commissioners and Executive Director Larry Goldspan. My name is Pat Lamborn. I'm here to speak on the same issue, this Marriott Residence Inn at 2900 Harbor Bay Parkway. I'm here to ask that you require a permit of this development. At the size that it is, it's a major project right on the bay. It requires, in my opinion, a major permit. Without too much repetition, I just want to share with you, I came to a BCDC meeting in September of 2015. It was because of the development the previous speaker, Mr. Ernst, referred to. I came because I thought my city was putting one over on you guys, that they had violated the agreement you signed about that use. They'd put in a permit application for ferry parking. It wasn't near the ferry. It was right in front of that hotel. I came to make sure my city didn't pull a fast one on BCDC, and to tell the truth and to blow the whistle. And that's why I'm here today. But today I'm here to ask that BCDC doesn't pull a fast one on my city and on the residents in the community. We could argue on the head of the pin, in terms of the litigation, but I feel like it's truly clear. BCDC signed an agreement with HBIA, and I will share with you and put into public record an email that your legal department sent in 2015 to the attorney of HBIA. And in that agreement, it's a third supplementary agreement. It states, section number 5, no modification of jurisdiction. Any amended TCA, right, supplementary agreement, does not constitute modification or application of BCDC jurisdiction or controls as to any other party other than HBIA. Mr. Ernst is a successor owner, and the next developer of this hotel is a successor owner. Are you going to give up your jurisdiction of permitting? That's your power. That's how you mandate public access. This hotel is already defined and out of compliance with our own city's planning setbacks for a building of its size. There's been no design review. If you require a permit, there'll be a design review by your own experts on your committee. So we're asking you to require a permit, or you'll set a dangerous precedent all around the bay in terms of your jurisdiction. The things that have been said have already emboldened this developer. He's added your logo to his PowerPoint and presents it that you've already approved and endorsed his project. There's nothing in writing. Obviously, we've asked for it. So he is going to use that on Monday at our planning board meeting to say that you've approved his project. That's not true. You can amend that. Please send a letter to our planning board saying it does not met with either permitting or approval as of that date.
Thank you. Stephen Gortles? Gortlet. Yes. I apologize. I'm not batting real well this afternoon.
Yes, my name is Stephen Gortler. I'm a resident of Alameda. I don't want to repeat everything that's been said, but I do feel strongly that your staff, in granting an exemption from the permitting requirements, is usurping their authority. They're taking on the role of the commission, and that's your job. You can't delegate your job to staff. You need to get involved. You need to find out about this project. You need to invest a little time and effort and make it your business to either grant an exemption or to require a permit.
Thank you, sir. Manuel Gamboa.
Is this about Mr. Gamboa, is this about,
The Golden Gate Bridge?
you have to wait until item number 11. Apologies,
I
we put this in the
apologize.
wrong,
I thought you wanted to speak on
we
both.
put this in the wrong deck.
Maybe we can get how you say, in the American League, they got a different batter that goes up there with.
Designated hitter rule, there you go.
We're not going there. But I appreciate the suggestion. Jesus Jimenez. Not a chance.
I am Andrea Ost. I'm also with the Marine Science Institute, and I'd like to speak before Jesus, if that's okay.
It is.
Oh, thank you. So I'm the chair of the board of directors for the Marine Science Institute in Redwood City. MSI is a nonprofit organization that provides education programs to youth and adults about the ecology of San Francisco Bay. Since it was founded in 1970, we've served more than 1.3 million students, including 50,000 students this past year alone. We host 10,000 of these students every year at our Bayside facility, providing them with engaging hands-on experiences with San Francisco Bay marine life. MSI is a really unique and special organization that creates lifelong stewards of the Bay through its programs. I have two things for you today. First, I want to thank BCDC staff for issuing a permit that allowed MSI to complete our dock repairs last week, which were crucial for providing a safe experience at our site. Second, we need more help. We need your approval to replenish our 100-foot-long beach with oyster shells. We use the beach to enable students to engage directly with the Bay. It's the most thrilling part of our shoreside program, especially for students who come to us as young as in kindergarten. The beach has eroded over the years, making it really unsafe for our programs. Oyster shells from the Bay have been used for decades in order to make it a safe space for our students to access the water. It's a 2-day job to replenish the beach, and we know that you want to help. We just need to expedite the approval as we've been working on this for 5 years. BCDC staff wonders how long the new shells will last on the beach, and we spoke with an engineer recommended by staff who said that no one will be able to tell how long the shells will last. We want to work with BCDC staff to resolve this quickly so that we can get children safely back on the beach. We have a window at the end of this year when schools are out of session, and that would be the ideal time to complete this work, but we would need expedited approval to make that happen. The work is being paid for funds established for Bay mitigation as a result of the Costco-Busan settlement. And the trustees also wanted the work done by the end of this year, though they may be flexible on the timing of that. We realize we're asking a lot to expedite something for year end, though I would suggest that it would be a fantastic gift for our thousands of students who would continue to be lifelong stewards of the San Francisco Bay. Thank you so much for your time and for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you. Mr. Jimenez?
Good afternoon. I am the Jesus Jimenez, and I'm the facilities engineer and an educator and have been at MSI for the last 12 years. And first and foremost, I also want to thank everyone at BCDC, particularly the staff that has helped to support our efforts in repairing our pier and work with us on our beach restoration project. As Andrea mentioned, last week we just completed these repairs to the pier, and these repairs will allow us to ensure the safety of thousands of students and visitors as they board our research vessel to explore the bay. For many students, MSI is the first time that they board any sort of ship, and the experience can have a positive and profound impact for their whole lives. And it can really impact the way they perceive their environment and their role in protecting their environment. However, for many students that are too young to go out on the boat, we have a shoreside program that happens at our site, and if you can just see the pictures up there, it is in desperate need of restoration. The naturally occurring oyster shell beach that has been up there for decades now has eroded away over the years, and it's caused a serious concern for both the program and the safety of each and every one of the students that comes through MSI, not to mention the thousands of boaters that use the site on a yearly basis. We've been cooperating with BCDC, like Andrea mentioned, over the last 5 years on getting this permit issued. It's a very, very small restoration, just over 100 feet on the shoreline, and we have approval from every other required federal and state agency. We've provided BCDC with all the information that you've requested and followed their recommendations. Like Andrea mentioned, we contacted a coastal engineer that BCDC recommended to assist us with submitting some additional information. Mr. Balbatalio advised us that this specific project could be a test case restoration to help determine the actual cause of the erosion, which no one can tell us here and now. And with the guidance from BCDC and Mr. Battaglio, we prepared and submitted a monitoring plan and management plan, and still it's not enough information. So commissioners, today I implore you to help us expedite the issuance of this permit so that we may continue to educate future generations on how to be stewards for the San Francisco Bay. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, sir.
Chairman, could I ask the speaker which one is the before and which one's the after picture? If you'll come back to the mic.
Maybe these pictures don't do it quite justice. I'm sure if any one of you visited the site, there would be no question. But the left there is what the beach looked like historically. That picture has been dated back to the early 90s. And as you can see, all the students are standing on what is almost a dune of oyster shells. Those were naturally deposited. No staff member or organization or anyone ever went out to deposit those shells. And if you look on the right, they're kind of mirror images. There's actually only 2 pictures, there's just 4 of them up there. On the right, you see all the riprap and the concrete, and the shading is a little off, but to the left of the picture on the right, you see a big 2-foot drop off. That's where the erosion has been continuing and exposing riprap and rebar, which is a serious, serious hazard. So essentially, out of the 100-foot stretch of the beach, only about 10 feet or less are actually usable for our students and visitors.
Thank you. So that's what I'd see today. Thanks.
Dana Sack.
I'm also here on the issue of the Harbor Bay Marriott Residence Inn. I have copies here of the developer's image that they created of what the hotel is going to look like. And I'd like to have you pass that around. There are about 10 of them. So what the Harbor Bay community residents are asking of the commission is that the commission put on its agenda for a future meeting a review of whether or not this project should go through the regular permit process or be allowed to be done by a backroom side deal by staff. The agreement that Mr. Ernst referred to is dated November 13th, 1990, and it was based on it was based in reliance on an amended CEQA EIR from 1989. A lot has happened since then, and for the commission through its staff to approve a side deal allowing anything based on that ancient document is completely inappropriate. there ought to at least be a hearing where the commission can decide whether that's the right course of action for staff to be taking, or whether this should go through the permit process. We've been told that the staff is or has prepared a memo on which way it should go, but we haven't seen it yet, so we have no idea what their criteria are, whether they're valid or facts or not. When that agreement was done in 1990, it required a minimum setback from Shoreline Park, which is only 20 feet wide from the water, and it's a wonderful park, but it's just a walking trail and a bike path. I use it myself all the time. It's a wonderful trail. They're talking about building a 73-foot building 35 feet from that trail. In 1990, when BCDC approved this complicated side agreement in lieu of a permit and set a minimum of 35 feet, it was relying on the subdivision agreement and the development agreement that Harbor Bay Isle Associates entered into with the city of Alameda. Those two documents require that buildings at 35 feet or less can be built with a 35-foot setback, but taller buildings require greater setbacks. Buildings 50 to 100 feet tall require a setback of 50 to 100 feet. What this developer and the city staff in Alameda have done and are going to do at the next planning board meeting is they're going to say that they can disregard that agreement, the subdivision improvement agreement and the development agreement, because you said it's okay. That's what the planning staff report says, is that they should disregard the subdivision improvement agreement that your prior commission relied on in entering into that 1990 agreement because you told them it was okay. Oh, done?
Thank you, sir.
That was the most important thing. And so all we're asking is the staff needs to tell the planning board at the meeting on the 10th that no, we're still trying to figure out what we're going to do, and we would ask that the commission hold a hearing to decide: are we going to do a backroom side agreement based on this 1990 agreement? Or are we going to look at this a little hard, or are we even going to do a full permit process?
Sir, if you have that written down in a prepared statement because you couldn't finish it, could you please hand it to Ms. Atwell and we'll just make sure we have it? Thank you.
His name is Leach, Robert Leach?
Robert Leach.
Robert Leach.
Fussy, fussy, fussy. That concludes public comments and brings us to item 4, approval of the minutes of our meeting of November 15th. We've been provided copies. Do I have a motion to approve? So moved. Vice Chair Halstead moves, and Commissioner Vasquez seconds. Thank you. Any comments, corrections? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Mr. Nelson, Commissioner Nelson abstains. That brings us to my report. It's been an interesting few weeks about climate change. The papers are again daily rife with articles comparing the increase in greenhouse gases to a runaway freight train. There is a campaign that is also gaining steam, pun intended, to persuade all of us to severely limit, if not give up, eating meat. It's not a crazy campaign, by the way. If you look at the percentage of greenhouse gases emitted because of the animals that are raised to feed us meat. So, amidst that bad news, the good news is at least the press, and as we know by polls, people are paying But the attention continues to be towards mitigation, which is critical, no question. Adaptation is still getting relatively little attention, more than it had been, but still little. And that, for me, increases the importance of the education campaign that we are starting to try and figure out and plot out and plan. And that was made particularly clear to me in a report, which I do commend to you, which just came out, Larry pointed out to me, issued by the University of California, Berkeley Law. It's a little hard for me to say that. In conjunction with the Resource Legacy Fund. Priority Policy Solutions for California's Next Governor, Water, Climate, and Wildlife. There is some discussion, not a lot, some discussion of adaptation in there. There is, disappointingly, no discussion of rising sea levels. So, all of that is simply to say our mission continues to be of utmost importance in saving both the natural and the built environment around our bay, in and around our bay, from what we know will happen. And given the other comments about the increase in rate of greenhouse gas emission, is going to happen sooner than we have talked about. So our task is great, the need is great, and we're going to continue to demonstrate that our will is great. With that, I will ask our alternate, Jeff Holtzman, to give us a report on financing the future workshop that met this morning.
Sure, thanks, Zach. So we met across the hall at 10:30, and most of the session was devoted to a very interesting presentation by Dr. Susie Moser, a climate change researcher and consultant who had been working on a study looking at coastal managers' needs as they prepare for and manage climate change and sea level rise impacts, resilient and adaptive projects, especially the finance challenges that they face. And what the study was mostly looking at was finding common themes and topics across projects. She identified, I think, 15 major common problems that we could quickly sum up to be similar and unfortunate that there's just not enough staff time, not enough resources, but in this case, at least the problems are enormous. We did spend some time talking about those, and as we were running out of time, she teased us by saying at the back of the presentation there were possible solutions for each one of these 15 categories. I believe that the presentation is going to be made available to the public, and I'd encourage everyone to look at it.
Thank you. I would now ask...
Chair, could we ask that that presentation be sent out to the Commission?
It will be sent out. Yes. Commissioner Alvarado to report on the Phil for Habitat Work Group meeting.
The Environmental Justice Commissioner Working Group. Yes.
You're right.
Also known as,
We wrote
yes.
it, yes.
Yes,
you.
the Environmental Justice Commissioner Working Group met this morning as well. In addition to myself, we had Commissioners Pemberton and Showalter participate, and we had a discussion about BCDC's Bay Plan policies regarding mitigation, specifically talking about our authority, the scope, timing, and implementation of mitigation policies and how they could address environmental justice and social equity. The full commission will receive a presentation today on the agenda about our activities to date, and so I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to introduce a very important guest. Mark Osler serves as NOAA's Senior Advisor for Coastal Inundation and Resilience. In that role, he works across the federal government's National Ocean Service and the broader NOAA community to provide national-level leadership and engage federal, state, and local stakeholders so that they can advance coastal improvements, inundation science, and increase the ability of decision-makers to prepare for and respond to changes affecting coastal communities. Mark worked for 18 years in the private sector, most recently as the national practice leader for his firm's coastal flood risk and community resilience business line prior to joining NOAA. Following Hurricane Sandy, Mark led the flood risk vulnerability study and resultant flood mitigation framework designed for the World Trade Center, as well as analysis of climate change impacts to major airports around New York City. He has worked extensively with FEMA on modeling, mapping, and communicating flood risk. I'm going to be interested in the communicating part. Over the course of his career, Mark has performed coastal risk analysis for regions in the Atlantic, Gulf of Mexico, Pacific, Great Lakes, Alaska, and Antarctica. Mark, as well as other senior NOAA representatives, are in California for a few days to participate in next week's Restoring America's Estuaries and Coastal State Organization Biennial Conference, which is being sponsored in part by the 3 coastal zone management agencies, including ours. Mark, we are looking forward to your comments.
Chair Wasserman, Vice Chair Halstead, Commissioners, thanks for the opportunity to spend some time with you this afternoon. As was mentioned, I'm always happy to get out of DC and particularly happy to get to the Bay Area. I'm pleased to be spending my second day of 8 days in California with you. One of the highlights for me here in San Francisco is to learn about the priorities, challenges, and successes that BCDC has had and continues to have, as well as other partners in the Bay Area, all of which are essential to increasing this region and our nation's coastal resilience. I always enjoy flying into SFO, always hopeful that the cloud cover breaks and I get a peek out the window at the beautiful and complex landscape in which you live and work. You hold in your hands a profound responsibility. And of the very many stakeholders involved in caring for our nation's shorelines, no matter where I travel, it is undoubtedly the local officials and the deliberative bodies such as BCDC which have the greatest challenge before them. Your ability as commissioners to work together to solve regional problems while addressing and respecting local challenges and issues and perspectives is the key to addressing this complexity. I appreciate and value your work in adjudicating, balancing, and joining these many pieces together. Through this work, you have created partnerships that cross jurisdictional lines and scales across public and private industry, as well as nonprofit stakeholders, and allowed this community to tackle critical coastal challenges that affect the communities and resources throughout the region. Your organization is seen, and the actions of this region are seen, in an international lens in terms of leadership on how to deal with the issues that you face. You have been leaders with respect to addressing the issues of climate change, particularly with respect to sea level rise. My amazing team helped me prep for this visit by laying out a few of the BCDC greatest hits. And in the interest of time, rather than listing them, let me just say that as I read them, I was reflecting on the fact that as we reach to accomplish things that haven't been accomplished before, there can be no room for dogma. We must face these challenges with first principles in mind, common sense and logic. And as I read through your current ongoing initiatives to tackle the challenges of environmental justice, social equity, and refine how we consider the use of fill in the Bay, as well as to tackle the challenges of adaptation financing, these are all clear signals to me that this body possesses the self-reflection, the humility, and the openness to revisit how you do your business and always keeping an eye on the horizon for the best regional outcome. Now, none of us are doing this work alone, and my admiration of BCDC's leadership to this community is matched only by my pride in the foundational role that NOAA has played along this journey. When we partner together, we don't only benefit the region and the San Francisco Bay, but we serve as a model for the nation and all the others across the globe who are struggling with these same issues. Whether it's our joint effort together with NOAA, BCDC, and USGS to fund and collect a single authoritative set of high-resolution elevation data for the Bay, or our coastal zone management partnership and funding, or the trainings in coastal inundation mapping and green infrastructure, or other technical assistance and tool development, I am extremely proud of the role that NOAA has played in partnership with you. And on a personal note, I could not be more impressed than with the NOAA team that you have personally here in the Bay Area. I have with me Becky Smythe and Sarah Vandershally, who are there. They hate being recognized, but I think it's important to recognize them. Within an agency of 12,000 very smart and dedicated public servants, the team that you have with you at your side here stand out as some of the best colleagues I have the privilege to work with. What a tremendous luxury to know that you have partners like these who can support you over the long haul, over decades, and when necessary, marshal the resources of the federal agency to your side. In closing, let me reaffirm that NOAA values our partnership with BCDC tremendously. Together, we have continued to make progress by defining shared goals, working in concert with one another, and always striving to employ creativity and innovation. Managing the intersection of a vibrant city with alongside one of the world's most complex and beautiful estuaries is a tremendous challenge. It's a challenge that this city shares with other great cities on the planet, New York City, Tokyo, Jakarta. There's no script for you to follow to administer the business that you are asked to administer, but your work is writing that script for others to follow. NOAA could not be more proud. Thank you again for your continued partnership. Thank you for your leadership on these challenging issues, and be sure that NOAA will continue to work closely with you as you move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and your support.
Can I say one thing?
You may.
Thanks. Mark, before you go, and we didn't prepare this, I just want to let you know that BCDC staff believe that Becky and Sarah do a great job. And we really, really appreciate your support of them, because we can't do a lot of what we do without talking with them and making sure that we're all in alignment. And they are not only smart as all get out, they are incredibly accessible. And that's, you can't ask for more than that from any government agency. Thank you.
I appreciate that comment. I will be sure to take that home. That's no mystery in our agency, but it never hurts to hear that. So thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Our next BCDC meeting will not be held on December 20th. It's a late Hanukkah and early Christmas present of time. We will meet on January 3rd here in this building, when we expect to consider an agreement with the Coastal Conservancy to provide us funding for our participation in the Bay Restoration Regulatory Integration Team, otherwise known as BRIT. Hold a commission discussion on the composition and purpose of a reconstituted commission advisory committee. And a brief comment on that. No, I'll wait till January 3rd. That's all right. We do have, by mandate, a advisory committee. It has not met in a very significant amount of time. It, in the last several years, to some extent, has been supplanted in practice, not intentionally, with our series of public workshops, where we have solicited and received a lot of public advice. We also expect to hold a commission discussion on how regulatory staff is using the Ocean Protection Council's guidance on rising sea level to further the presentation made by Andrea and Eric last month. Now is the time to put any ex parte communications regarding adjudicatory matters on the record. This is voluntary. As you know, you need to do it in writing under any circumstances. But if people have received ex parte communications they wish to disclose, it is a good time to do it. We'll start on my left with Commissioner Pine.
I just wanted to inform my colleagues that I've been advised by council that I cannot participate in item number 9 and number 10 pertaining to Westpoint, as I was very involved in meetings between Westpoint and the staff over a number of months leading up to the preparation of those documents. So I will be excusing myself from those two portions of the meeting.
Thank you. That's it. All right, that brings us to the Executive Director's report.
Thank you very much, Chair Washman. Given the tight agenda, I want to mention only 3 issues. The first has already been taken care of. You have in your packet a copy of this document. We'd love for you to review it. It won't take you long, and provide us with your comments. Second, I sent each of you an email on Monday evening, and I want to reiterate that BCDC will hold a commission meeting on January 3rd, Thursday, here, that will include votes. In addition, we expect the meetings in February, March, and April to be chock full of permitting issues that will require votes, as well as workshops on our Bay Plan amendments. In other words, expect that we shall hold all of the meetings during the winter. They will last most of the afternoon, past 4 o'clock. In general, the first meeting of the month will include permits and other complex issues, and the second meeting of the month will be used for the workshops, but not always, so keep on your toes. Finally, please make sure that you complete your ethics training by year's end and that you provide Reggie Abad with the confirmation that you have done so. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the Executive Director? One item I forgot to state in my report, we're going to make a slight change in the agenda today. We're going to put item 11, the public hearing and possible vote on the Golden Gate Bridge physical suicide deterrent system, right after item 8, in respect of the people who have come to talk about that important issue. That does bring us, however, to item 8. And this is a public hearing and possible vote on Bay Point Restoration Project from East Bay Regional Park District. Eric?
No. Excuse me.
Will introduce the project.
Chair, we need to do the admin listing.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
The administration actions have been provided to us. Brad is here to take any flack if you have any questions. I assume that was a prop, not really something we should do. You get off easy once again. All right, now we can do 8. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Wasserman and Commissioners. On November 21st, you were mailed a summary of an application by the East Bay Regional Park District to construct the Bay Point Restoration Project, located at Bay Point Regional Shoreline at the terminus of McAvoy Road in the community of Bay Point, Contra Costa County. I'm going to run this video really quickly. You can see where we're going. We're at the very end of BCDC's jurisdiction, up toward the Delta. Woo. In case you're curious, the end of the jurisdiction on this side of the shoreline is about right here. The project involves restoring and enhancing approximately 17.65 acres of tidal marsh and bay waters by grading within an area diked off from the bay, excavating tidal channels, and breaching the existing berm. The project would improve an approximately 1.1 mile long existing public access trail called the Harrier Trail along the existing berms at the site, and enhance an approximately 1,700 foot long existing spur trail leading to a new boat launch for small hand launch boats. The project will involve the placement of approximately 33,651 square feet of fill in the bay, including within existing tidal marsh in the bay, and approximately 13,676 square feet of excavation. The bay fill will be placed primarily to raise and widen the existing public access pathways and to install a boat launch. Both the restoration components and the public access provided by the project would be resilient to a mid-century of sea level rise projection of over 2 feet. The tidal marsh restored by this project can accommodate sea level rise by migrating upland as water levels rise. The spur trail may occasionally flood in the highest tide events at the end of the project life of 2070, while the Harrier Trail will be resilient to an end-of-century projection of 6.9 feet of sea level rise. However, it is likely the trails will flood in extreme storm events over time. The staff summary lists the issues raised by the project, in particular whether the proposed fill for the project is consistent with the Waterfront Park Beach Priority Use designation in the San Francisco Bay Plan, whether the project is consistent with the McIntyre-Petrus Act and the Bay Plan policies on fill and natural resources, and whether the project provides maximum feasible public access consistent with the project. Here to present the project is Chris Barton from the East Bay Regional Park District. There you are.
Good afternoon, Chair Wasserman, members of the commission. My name is Chris Barton. I'm with East Bay Regional Park District. I'd like to thank Eric and his staff, along with Brad McCrae, for all the help in getting this project to this point. And also from our project team, we have Melissa Carter and we have Michelle Gioli. I would say the best in the business in developing these kinds of habitat restoration projects. So we've got a great team, and we appreciate all the help getting up to this point. So I'm going to run through a brief slideshow that provides some background and also some history, and then also just to describe the proposed project. And Eric did a great job of showing where Stake Point is located on that other graphic that he just showed. Is there a pointer there? Yeah, there we go. Well, I guess it's already pointed to. Is there a pointer we can activate on that? Just have to use the mouse. Okay. Okay, so that's Stake Point right there, just due east of our project site. So we're at the far eastern limits of BCDC's jurisdiction. And Bay Point Regional Shoreline is located between Concord and Pittsburgh, for those that don't get out into East Contra Costa County very often. What's unique here is we have a large residential population, around 4,000 or so, that's within a half mile of the shoreline. And also what we've discovered through applying for grants, and also what we knew, was that there's a severely disadvantaged community nearby. What I didn't know is that how severely disadvantaged it actually is, just by looking at the mean per capita income, which is less than $16,000 per year, which frankly was shocking to me. And to combine this also with it also being in one of the most limited areas for parkland access makes this project especially important. In West Contra Costa County, this is one of the most park deficient areas. So we're very happy to be able to bring forward these improvements to the park. This graphic is taken straight from the park brochure. So you can see what's out here already. There's this loop trail. As Eric mentioned, it's a 1.1 mile loop trail, which is huge for public health, to encourage people to get out there to exercise. There's tidal emergent marsh that surrounds most of the property. Overall, the entire park is encompassed by that light green line. I'm not sure if you can see. Oh yeah, you can see the pointer there. So the light green line is the park boundary. It's about 130 acres. There's currently access to the park at this corner at the Star. There's currently a restroom, parking, and a picnic area. This is looking at the aerial view. Eric had a nice zoom in. I'd like to point out one feature as I'm going through the slideshow. There's this J-shaped channel I'll refer to as the J channel. And one thing I'd like to point out is that historically, as Eric has mentioned, it's completely diked in area. The land that we're restoring was historically used for sand mining, and the way the operation would occur is a barge would park in this J channel here, and there was a pipe that would run along. You can kind of see the remnants of this levee, and the pipe would go into this area where you can see some of the remnant dikes that are in here. Once the slurry of sand was pumped in there, the sand would be dried out, and then the sand would be available for market, and it would be trucked out at that point. So that's our restoration area. Here's some photos from the ground. So there are some low quality seasonal wetlands. There are also some higher quality wetlands which we are keeping intact. Here you can see, for those that know weeds, every type of weed known to us are probably located here. So we've got ice plant, perennial pepperweed. We've got Italian thistles. We've got fennel. This photograph here shows the trail failing. So that Harrier Loop trail currently floods. So part of the project is to raise the elevation of the trail so it remains high and dry, but not only that, but also accessible to persons with disabilities. This is a photograph of the existing staging area that's out there. We do have picnic tables, restroom, and a parking lot. One of the upgrades that we have included with this recent upgrade to the park is to bring shade. So there are shade structures that are going, actually the shade structures have gone in. That's been a project that's been running ahead of this current application and is outside of the BCDC's jurisdiction. And then also Running water, that was one of the first things that I noticed going out there, is if we expect people, especially in East Contra Costa County, to come out to picnic, that you need to have running water. So that's something that required an annexation into Delta Diablo Sanitary District, which the Park District has moved forward with. So we're confident we're going to be bringing water into the park. Going through the history of the park, the land was first acquired about 20 years ago. 5 years or so after that, the Park District developed a land use plan which establishes the intensity and type of development for recreational access. Shortly thereafter that, the size of the park was greatly expanded through a state lands lease. About 80 acres was added to the park. And I add this 2006 milestone here as well, which is the passing legislation of the Great California Delta Trail system by Torlakson, and this is a huge huge piece of legislation that creates public access in both Contra Costa and Solano counties. And the Bay Point Park is actually a key node in that trail. So there is a there for folks that are using that trail. And then in 2007, the land use plan park improvements, the first batch of improvements were implemented, and that's the parking lot and the picnic area that you saw on the previous slide. So here we are today. My job as a project manager is to move forward with implementing the rest of the land use plan, and that's what's before the commission this afternoon, and that includes the public access and the habitat restoration component. And so we'd like to the project goal is to implement the land use plan, and these are co-equal goals. And I say that meaning that public access is not an afterthought, and neither is habitat restoration. We'd like, the way we've designed this project is that both of these elements would be developed and implemented given the same consideration. So for restoration, we'd like to improve or to bring back the tidal emergent marsh that was formerly filled. With the goal that high-value habitat would be established for sensitive species such as salt marsh harvest mouse and also ridgeways rail and all the other species that would fall under that same umbrella. And then also public access, as what's already been mentioned, we'd like to make the trail accessible in the immediate near term, but also in the later on down the road, we also would like it to be resilient to sea level rise, thus the need to fill some areas in the commission's jurisdiction. Chair Wasserman, how am I doing with time? Okay, I will speed it up. Okay, so getting right to it, this is the slide showing our public access improvements. And you can see the J channel there, and what we're proposing to install. One of the main features here is where we connect the former sand dredge spoil area to make it tidal emergent. We are installing a bridge here. You can see a channel that will be dug into the area and will be open to tidal action. And here where you see the little binocular symbols, these are all overlook areas where the public can stop. There will be a bench there and clear and open views of the marsh. And so the entire trail will be accessible to persons with disabilities. Over here we have what's referred to as the spur trail. And this is where there's a kayak launch that's proposed. And I put these recycling containers here because if you go out there, you'll notice one of the greatest needs is trash pickup out there. This is located in an area where we're negotiating a trail access easement. The BCDC does have a designated trail out in that area in cooperation with the property owner from a past action out there, but there's a lot of trash. So with this project, we will have a full 8-foot wide accessible trail that leads out to these trash cans and also to trash and recycling cans and also to a kayak launch. So this is a non-motorized launch where there is some distance to get out there from the parking lot, and the reason why it's further out there is there's just not enough tidal prism to scour out the channel to make it sustainable. Originally, when the land use plan was developed, the kayak launch was more in this location here, which would be logical to be closest to the parking. But I tell people this, one of the nice things about taking 10 years to develop the plan is that we can see that it's silted in there and it's not a good place for a kayak launch. So now we know where it's at. So plus, once we build this, habitat restoration portion, there will be even more tidal prism. So when the tide is coming out, it will scour through here and then meet up and converge with this channel that scours out where our kayak launch will be located, and we'll have a sustainable launch. So that's why it's far away. To make it so it's easier for folks to get out there, there's going to be a bike rack on a concrete pad. So for those that have kayaks that wheel them out in dollies, there will be a place to lock up your kayak. So these are pictures of weeds and an old car out there. We were speculating on what kind of car it was. Some say it was an old Camaro. I think it was maybe a Triumph or something, but it's a little tiny car that's been left over that we inherited. So things like that will be cleaned up. This takes us to the restoration plan, which is very similar to a past project that I worked on out at in Richmond, and that's the Dotson Family Marsh, otherwise known as Bruner, where essentially we removed the fill, the bay fill, and then took that fill and created uplands, and then also used that fill to raise the trails. So if I could point out here, the lighter green would be the new tidal emergent marsh, and then you could see these topography lines here where we're elevating. So we're taking that fill and placing it here to elevate these upland areas, so there would be an ecotone transition from the wet areas up to the high and dry areas. And then this lighter greenish color area would be areas of enhancement where there will be breaches to some of these levees that are out there to allow some tidal action to improve the habitat there. And this is the sea level rise projection. As Eric mentioned, it is designed to be resilient through 2050, but we've also designed it to, we've projected out and taken it even further to 5.5 feet of sea rise by the end of the century. And the trail will remain intact for the Harrier Loop Trail. And as you can see, there's a different combination of habitat types that will become more and less available as time goes on. And for those folks that are interested in money, and we have to bring up money because that's how we get the projects built, we have a lot of grant funding partners. This happens to be a much smaller project, and the smaller projects dollar for dollar cost more because there's economies of scale involved here. But we have some great funding partners, starting with the county and also with the state all the way up to the federal level. And that concludes my presentation. I'll end here with that we're really happy to be here. This is BCDC is a great, being in front of this commission is a great place to be because that means we've gotten towards the end of the process and we're ready to build it. So we hope to go to construction on this project by next year. And that concludes my presentation. I can answer any questions if you have them.
Before we go to questions, we will open the public hearing. We have I don't think I have any cards on item 8, just double checking that nobody submitted one. Questions from commissioners? Commissioner Nelson.
Mike. Two questions for the applicant, and I'm hoping we can scroll back through the presentation because there were two questions I had there. The first is, right, that one, the sea level rise slide. Can you walk us through what happens to the trails here as we look at the sea level rise projections? That looks like on the right, that looks like a wet trail. So I'm just checking in to see what you can tell us about how the trails will do.
Sure. So I think left and right are the same. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll focus just on this slide over here. So the trail starts, the parking lot is back here at this area. Can everyone see this pointer, this mouse pointer? Okay. So I wish it was glowing. Some of these things have a glowing.
I'm not sure.
There usually is an option to make it glow. Well, I could use this. Does this work? Oh, here we go.
Oh,
For those that can see this. Okay. Which works better? Chair Wasserman, which is preferred? This? Okay. Okay, so if we start the trail here in this direction this is a 1.1 mile loop. So if you start your walk from here at the parking lot and go this direction up to this point at this corner, it's fairly high and dry right now. The biggest constraint with sea level rise is the trail currently floods in this area here. It's fairly low in these areas. So this is where the trail needs to be raised the most. And this is where the new bridge is going to be located to span across this channel. So, the blue is not.
Thank you.
The blue is not flooding. So the good news is this brownish gold color is going to be there through 2100, which means we'll be high and dry there. And then as far as the habitat goes, the darker green color is the low marsh, and then the lighter green is the high marsh. So immediately we will have the habitat benefit of having that high quality habitat. And then fast forward 30 years, a lot of it will be converted to low marsh, but there will still be some high marsh and some upland transition area. And then of course, as we start to get closer to 2100, it really becomes slim going up to the trail elevation.
And on that slide, with regard to elevations, freshwater and brackish marshes do a better job of keeping up with sea level rise than salt marshes do. But do these estimates of inundation impacts include estimates in sedimentation changes, elevation changes in the marsh itself as it tries to keep up with sea level rise? Do you know the answer to that?
Yes, we have our coastal engineer here, but sedimentation and accretion was accounted for in the sea rise projections.
Okay. Second question is a couple slides before where you show the same, that one. Can you walk us through the breaches for that lighter green area that you showed as being enhanced habitat in the upper left?
Sure. So with the lighter green, these are some remnant dikes that are out there now. And I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation there's some higher quality habitat out here, and it's located here. So the project, what's proposed is to breach at this location here, so to open this more up to tidal action. So there will be more salt, brackish water that's going into those areas. So through the evaporation cycle, it will become more of a more accumulation of salt. So it will become a kind of not a perennial pond, but just a kind of a seasonal pond that's out there.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to understand how the breaches work. Appreciate it.
Sure. You're welcome.
We're still waiting? No, no. No other questions? I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
So moved.
Peggy, do you have those?
No.
Nelson and Butt.
No, it wasn't you.
Vasquez. Vasquez is the seconder of the day. This can be voice vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The hearing is closed. Now, any questions before we go to staff recommendation? Still not. Eric, will you present the staff recommendation, please?
Certainly. On November 30th, 2018, you were mailed a staff recommendation on the Bay Point Restoration Project. The staff recommends that the Commission approve BCDC permit number 2017.006.00 to authorize the proposed project. The staff recommendation contains special conditions, including the permittee will provide the approximately 1.1 mile long Harrier Trail and the approximately 1,700 foot long existing spur trail and the new boat launch for small hand launch boats, along with site amenities. The permittee shall submit a final monitoring plan for review and approval by or on behalf of the Commission based on specified success criteria. The permittee shall monitor the restoration project for a 10-year term and provide monitoring reports and conduct adaptive management measures if necessary. The permittee shall construct the project to minimize adverse impacts to existing tidal marsh except for the areas that would be filled and minimize adverse impacts to wildlife. As conditioned, the staff believes that the project is consistent with your law and the Bay Plan policies regarding fill and public access. And with that, we recommend that you adopt the recommendation.
Has the... Oh, you want the motion first? All right. I would entertain a motion to approve the staff recommendation.
I'll move approval.
McGrath and Showalter. Has the applicant reviewed the staff recommendation, and do you accept it?
Yes, we'd gladly accept the conditions.
Thank you. Any questions or discussion?
I do have a comment.
Thank goodness.
About 16 years ago, a group of kayakers approached me. They had found Middle Harbor and they needed a windsurfer on their board. And they were engaged in preparing legislation which ultimately became the Bay Water Trail. They've had great traction here and in the Bay and have had as a goal moving it up into the Delta. They are extraordinarily excited about this. The East Bay Regional Park District has been a wonderful partner in improving access, and I urge the commission to vote to approve this.
Thank you.
Chair, just one quick question.
Yes.
So construction begins next year. When will you be completed?
We expect about a 6-month construction schedule, so
okay.
hopefully by the end of next year.
Thank you.
Commissioner Showalter.
Yeah, all the work period shall be confined to August 1st through November 30th. What is the basis for that? That seemed like an odd period to me. Usually it's a little longer than that. It's a very short period. It's on page 8 for A. It says all in-water work, including pile driving and excavation of tidal channels, shall avoid extreme tides and shall be confined to August 1st through November 30th.
Yeah, that's to minimize wildlife impacts. I can't remember the species.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it's fish. It's fish.
Yeah, it sounds very familiar to the NIMS work window.
Yeah, I believe it's
Right.
taken from the
Because fish is usually June to December, but anyway, so this is even narrower. Okay, thank you.
And it's just for this pile driving and the excavation.
Peggy, will you please call the roll on the motion?
Okay. Commissioner Adiego? Commissioner Alvarado? Commissioner Butt?
Yes.
Commissioner Gilmore? Commissioner Sharp? Commissioner Gorin? Commissioner Pemberton? Commissioner McGrath? Commissioner Peskin? Commissioner Pine? Commissioner Nelson? Commissioner Randolph? Commissioner Sears? Commissioner Showalter? Commissioner Vasquez? Commissioner McElhaney? Commissioner Teckel? Commissioner Wagenknecht? Commissioner Holtzman? Vice Chair Halstead? And Chairman Wasserman?
Yes.
Did I miss anybody? No? So we have 21 yes, no.
The motion passes. Thank you all. Thank you for a very exciting project. That brings us to item 11, which is the public hearing and possible vote on the Golden Gate Bridge physical suicide deterrent system. Ethan Levine will introduce the project.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Wasserman, Commissioners. On November 21st, you were mailed a summary of an application by the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District to material amend its BCDC permit to allow for construction of a physical suicide deterrent system at the Golden Gate Bridge. The district believes the deterrent system will be effective in reducing the number of fatalities and suicide attempts from the Golden Gate Bridge, as it has been at many other bridge systems using such a system across the world. That system would consist of a stainless steel netting suspended approximately 20 feet below the elevation of the sidewalks that run along the east and west sidewalks of the bridge. The project would also require some work beneath the bridge to replace components of a permanent maintenance scaffolding system that will be impacted by installation of the new system. Finally, during construction, chain link security fencing would be installed along sections of the bridge sidewalk for security purposes, and some construction staging would occur on the bridge sidewalks. However, access for pedestrians and bicyclists would be maintained throughout construction. It's helpful to understand BCDC jurisdiction in relation to the bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge is 1.7 miles long, and the system would be installed both within and outside of the Commission's jurisdiction. The Commission's Bay jurisdiction is shown here in blue. On the San Francisco side of the shoreline, BCDC's shoreline band jurisdiction, shown in green in a second, extends 100 feet inland, and it encompasses a portion of the arch on the bridge's south approach, and the portion in red is outside of the permitting jurisdiction of BCDC. Now we'll look at the opposite side in Marin. Here you'll see that the Commission's shoreline band jurisdiction extends in about 100 feet from the North Tower, with the rest outside of the Commission's permitting jurisdiction. The application summary identifies issues raised by the project, including allowable bay fill, appearance, design, and scenic views, and public access. On the issue of allowable fill of the bay, the McAteer-Petras Act allows for some filling of the bay for purposes providing substantial public benefits if these same benefits could not be achieved equally well without filling. The project has minimal potential for harmful effects to the bay itself, given its location approximately 220 feet above the bay's waters. It does have the potential to adversely affect bird species who might attempt to nest or become tangled in a net system. However, the project incorporates measures to reduce the potential for such adverse impacts, and it also includes monitoring to ensure mitigation is successful in avoiding such impacts. On the issue of appearance, design, and scenic views, the project would result in visual impacts. However, maximum efforts have been made to preserve views of the bays through its design. Shown here is an alternative that was studied to give you a sense of proposals that were rejected because of the more severe design and view impacts that would have occurred. The proposed net system, on the other hand, would only be visible to individuals looking at the bridge from the shoreline or the bay itself, or who are looking down at the bay from over the edge of the handrails at the bridge's sidewalks. The net itself is designed of materials that would maximize visual transparency to the greatest extent, if feasible. And during construction only, the use of temporary chain link fencing for security would be required along sections of the bridge's sidewalk handrails, which, although transparent, would have an effect on the public's experience, albeit on a temporary basis. Finally, on the issue of public access, the bridge's sidewalks are extremely well used by pedestrians and bicyclists, as you know well. The permanent system would not occupy any space on these sidewalks, though some temporary construction, staging, and storage would occur on the sidewalk, while maintaining a line of passage at least 6 feet wide in any given spot. The district does not propose to construct any new or improved public access areas or amenities as part of this project. Although, unlike most other projects that appear before you, the project would not displace any existing public access, nor would it create greater need or demand for public access than exists at present. So that concludes the staff presentation on the issues raised, and I'd now like to introduce Dennis Mulligan, the general manager for the district, to introduce the project.
Thank you, Ethan. Can you hear me okay? Perfect. My name is Dennis Mulligan, and I'm the General Manager for the Golden Gate Bridge Highway and Transportation District. And I'm here today to discuss the proposed permit associated with saving lives at the Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge is not part of the state highway system. We're a separate entity with a separate board that sets our policy. We're the agency that built the bridge, and we own and operate it today. The bridge is a tremendous achievement with respect to its original construction. It was built in the midst of the Great Depression when money was tight. But while money was tight, they still had the foresight to include public access on the bridge. The bridge was constructed with sidewalks on both its east and west sides. When the bridge first opened to the public, it was open to pedestrians. Cars had to wait a day. I draw your attention to this photograph. On the lower left side, you'll see a couple people sitting on a rail. When the bridge was originally built, that railing, which is quite low, works as a seat, is all that separated vehicles from the sidewalks. Fast forward, over the decades, the Bridge District has made a variety of improvements to enhance access on the bridge. This is a picture of the east sidewalk. The east sidewalk along most of its length for the original construction was 10 feet wide. However, the last quarter mile was only 6 feet wide. The Bridge District widened that last quarter mile of the east sidewalk from 6 feet to 10 feet to match the rest of the bridge. The west sidewalk, when it was originally built, ended at the North Anchorage House. It did not extend all the way to the Trailhead parking lot in Marin County. So the Bridge District added a quarter mile of 10-foot wide sidewalk to the west sidewalk. So public access is part of who we are. Then you may recall that railing I pointed out on the prior slide where a couple people were seated on it. Well, if this bicyclist coming towards you in black would be bumped by one of the rental bikes going away from you on this page, they would have landed in a traffic lane per the original design. So we've added a safety railing to separate people adequately, which has greatly enhanced and made the sidewalks even more desirable. Those changes, coupled with changing demographics and increase in tourism, has led to our sidewalks being intensely used today. On a busy Saturday in July, we will commonly have over 20,000 people on our sidewalks in a single day. We'll have over 12,000 pedestrians walk partway out. We'll have over 8,000 bicycles cross the bridge. In this slide, the curve in the lower part of the slide, that's where we widened it from 6 feet to 10 feet, and you can see how that was essential. Unfortunately, not everyone that comes to the bridge is in a good mood. Some people are despondent. Some people come to the bridge to hurt themselves. So we currently have a variety of non-physical measures in place to intervene. For decades, we've had crisis counseling phones on the bridge where you can pick up a phone and someone will respond. A young person today probably won't recognize a phone attached with a cord, so we now partner with crisis text lines so you can text GGB to a number and get immediately responses back, plus we'll be able to locate your phone on the bridge so we know where to look for you. We currently have bridge patrols on the bridge, and 2.5 years ago we increased the size of the bridge control in light of the rising increase of suicides in our community. We have patrol officers on scooters, on bicycles, and on foot. Those non-physical measures do a lot of good, but there's unfortunately still much loss of life and tragedy. In 2017, last year, 278 people came to the bridge to hurt themselves. Last year, we stopped 245 people, including the people on this slide, who were taken off the bridge for a psychiatric hold at a local hospital. But sadly, 33 died. So as a community, we can do better. So we're going to build a physical barrier along the entire length of the bridge. As Ethan stated, the bridge is 1.7 miles long, and we'll build a physical barrier on both the east and west sides. What's contemplated is a net. The net will be located approximately 20 feet below the sidewalk, and it will extend out horizontally about 20 feet. Nets have been erected on about 24 bridges throughout the world, and those nets have been almost completely successful. There's been a virtual elimination of suicides. There's only been a handful at all those locations. And the longest they've been up is 2 decades. So this is a physical measure that will save lives. We have awarded the construction contract. We held a ceremony to mark that historic occasion where those that supported the project with respect to funding spoke and acknowledged this momentous time. Our contractors put up temporary fencing. The purpose of the temporary fencing is to protect the workers below so people don't drop cameras and cell phones on them, injuring the workers. But there is a secondary impact in that it allows our patrol to focus their efforts on those portions of the sidewalk where the fencing is not up. And we have had fewer suicides this year thus far. The bulk of the work you won't see, the bulk of the work occurs at night, and that's because traffic volumes are lower at night. So when traffic volumes are lower, we'll close lanes in the bridge where we won't cause a significant backup. Our contractor sets up their cranes and they lift equipment over the sides, threading between the vertical suspender ropes. This is a photo of a piece of that temporary access platform that is being erected to facilitate the installation of the net. This photo is taken from the north tower, looking across the strait to the south tower, immediately below the roadway. Meanwhile, all across the country at a variety of locations, parts are being fabricated. In Missouri, they're spinning the main border cables as we speak. The steel struts that will support the net are being fabricated in Oregon. This is a photo of a paint shop where they're being painted with our signature color, International Orange. The proposed fill is more than 220 feet above the water. The proposed fill is actually quite porous or open. Those struts that are located every 50 feet are only 8 inches wide. The border cable that runs along the length of the bridge on the outside of the cable is a little over 1 inch in diameter. And then the steel mesh is comprised of stainless steel wire ropes, and those wires are less than 3/16 inch in diameter. So the proposed fill is less than 10% solid, and it's more than 90% voids. This undertaking is not a substantial change in use of the Golden Gate Bridge. This project will save about 30 lives a year, and this project is essential to the health, safety, and welfare of the public. I respectfully request an affirmative vote. I thank you for your consideration, and I will be available to answer any questions at the appropriate juncture in your process.
Thank you. We will now open the public hearing and recognize speakers. Manuel Gamboa, on the correct item.
I meant no disrespect, just all a little bit of humor there.
No disrespect received.
And that little bit of humor comes, and satisfaction and happiness comes with this barrier that's started already on the Golden Gate Bridge. And the sorrow started 5 years ago when my son, Kyle Gamboa, at the age of 18, he stopped his truck by the sidewalk towards the east side, and with no hesitation got out and leaped over onto the sidewalk and over the rail. So I believe that if this net was here back in 2013, it would have prevented him from killing himself there at the bridge. You know, I don't know what the future would have held for him after that. But I know with this, the future, I believe it will save the lives of people like my son. And especially for the people that go there and look over the edge. They'll see this net. They'll realize that coming here is not going to do them any justice for whatever they're going through. I believe my son had a mental breakdown. He was just too proud or strong or whatever that no one knew what was going on with him to seek help. There was no warning. There was no sign. And the other thing that came as a kind of disappointment was for me to be here and to ask. And I thought, do I even have to ask? You know, I believe there's a lot of stuff going on and it needs to be done and this and that. But to have your vote for this permit to continue with this project to save lives, I just ask you to join me to help to save lives. And basically that's all I want to say. And I thank you for being here. And I think, you know, I don't want to be here. I'd much rather not have been here. But unfortunately, my son made that decision. And it's, I believe this is a good thing. And just thank you.
Thank you, sir, and I'm sorry for your loss. Paul Muller.
Goodness, I've already spent a second. My name is Paul Miller. I'm a founding member and current president of the Bridge Rail Foundation. Our organization exists to see that we stop the suicides on the Golden Gate Bridge. As many of you know, there have been well over 1,700 deaths from our most famous bridge. These are only the known deaths, however, where a body was recovered. There are many others where either the Coast Guard was not successful in recovering someone, or there was no witness or report of a jump made. So, some of these unreported deaths are simply washed out to sea. As large as this tragedy is, its profound impact on many families who suffer a suicide loss has never been fully calculated. Some of these families are represented here today, and they can tell you, as Mr. Gamboa did, of the tragedy itself is compounded by the simple fact that it can be prevented. Taller railings and nets on bridges are proven effective suicide prevention measures. They save lives. And when a fatal jump is impossible, those who would jump rarely choose another means, thus buying time for the suicidal impulse to pass or fade and for proper treatment to begin. It's important to note that the suicide problem on the Golden Gate Bridge is truly a regional issue. A 15-year review of the coroner's data clearly shows that this is a Bay Area problem. Over 85% of all the deaths at the gate are from the 9-county Bay Area, with San Francisco, Marin, and Santa Clara counties leading in the coroner's count. Finally, I think it's also important to note that the design and construction of the net will have minimal, if any, impact on the bay itself. It poses no interference to any bay or shoreline activities, nor will it interrupt any bay commercial or shipping work. In fact, when the net is in place, there should be less interference with activities on the bay, as there will be less need for first responders to respond. The net the Bridge District proposes to construct will stop an ongoing tragedy, where on average there are 3 suicides every month. It is an urgent life and death matter, and we implore you to act on this application today. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I would those were the only 2 cards I had. I just want to make sure there are no other speakers on this item. Thank you. I would entertain a motion to close the hearing. Vasquez Halstead. Oh, sorry, I'm Sharf Halstead. I'm stuck to you today. I don't know why. All those in favor of closing the hearing say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The hearing is closed. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Nelson, and then I'll turn.
This project is unlike virtually any other that comes before the commission, and part of our jurisdiction here is maximum feasible public access. And I think that essentially, that inherently means not just accessibility, but safety. So I've got a question for the applicant that I'm hoping he can help with. And I first actually want to start by thanking the witnesses for really impactful and moving testimony, the public speakers today. There's a trade-off here. Railing can provide a barrier that's extremely difficult to scale, but has public access inputs, visual impacts on that very heavily used path system, that sidewalk. A net system doesn't. But I think it's our job to make sure that trade-off works, that it works from a public access perspective, but it's actually safe enough for the people who are using that bridge and who are at risk. So can you help us understand? I understand how railing works. I don't know anything about suicide prevention. Can you help us understand why it is that these nets work? What prevents someone from simply making a second leap off of that net?
Got to press. Certainly. Suicidal people don't want to hurt themselves. They want to die. When there's a stainless steel wire rope netting down 20 feet, even in your most despondent state, it will be clear that you're going to hurt yourself. So it's difficult for us who are not going through this trauma to appreciate it. But there's a proven track record. And there are a couple published studies on this, because the most nets are up in Europe, in Switzerland and Germany. And researchers have done studies of the efficacy or the effectiveness of nets versus high railings. And the effect of nets is more impactful and greater at reducing suicides than high railings. People can climb high railings, but a net, for whatever reason, creates a mental stigma. Cornell University in upstate New York in Ithaca would have lots of suicides around finals weeks, and so they put nets up on 6 bridges. And they've had only 2 people jump. One jumped into the net and did climb to the edge and jump again. The other person jumped and was rescued. Some of the installations in Europe, such as the Münster Terrace in Bern, Switzerland, it's been up to over 20 years now, and not a single person has jumped into it. So there's a track record that belies our common sense logic, but the track record speaks for itself. If someone were to jump into this net, we are partnering with local first responders. Southern Marine Fire does cliff rescues when people are getting in trouble on the cliffs. So we'll be constructing a net on one side of their training tower in Mill Valley so they can practice, and they feel that a rescue here would be pedestrian compared to what they do on the cliffs. But with respect to how effective nets are, if you haven't read literature or looked at various test cases, it doesn't seem logical, but sometimes what's not logical is what works. And clearly they have worked at a variety of locations. Most locations, nobody has jumped, period. Ithaca is kind of unique that they've had 2 people jump into those 6 nets have been up about 3 years now.
Thank you.
Greg.
So I wanted to say that was a very logical response. I actually had the same question. I was wondering why you wouldn't jump and then jump again, and I think that makes total sense. My other question really was sort of minor. I guess I had the question of there's going to be a 6-foot clearance, a minimum 6-foot clearance. Right now, I forget how much clearance did we have on the sidewalk for the bikes and the pedestrians. It looked like it was like 10, right?
Right now, the sidewalks are about 10 feet wide, except where you get to a light pole. Where you get to a light pole, which is every 75 feet, it's narrowed by the existing light poles on the bridge.
Right, I've done that. It's actually annoying.
Yes. Currently, the east sidewalk is open daylight hours for pedestrians. Bicyclists have 24/7 access to the Golden Gate Bridge. At night, they have to buzz in and buzz out for security reason. We have gates that are automatic, and we track them going across the bridge for other reasons. So bikes have 24/7 access. We will maintain that during construction. But to construct this, we have to be out on the sidewalks. So we'll do much work at night, but we will do some work during the day where workers will access the platforms underneath to continue the attachments for the pieces that were erected at night. So we will have tools, equipment, different items staged. We'll have porta potties for the workers, things like that, that will narrow the sidewalks. But we will maintain a 6-foot width clear at all times. And you may recall when the bridge was built, that was what you had on a big chunk of the bridge for many, many decades. But it's impossible to build this without some impact. The bulk of the impact will be at night to motorists. And we will maintain 24/7 access, but there are times where you'll get to a work zone. There'll be flaggers on the sidewalk that'll help people get through safely. But it will have to be narrowed down to as narrow as 6 feet at times. Where we are staging on the east sidewalk, we will let the bikes on the west side during the day, weekdays, which currently we have them out there on weekends and after 3:30 weekdays, but we'll let them out there during the middle of the day if we have to narrow it with the east side with staging equipment and stuff. But we will maintain access 24/7, but it's vital that we build this, and we had to strike a balance between giving the contractor adequate access and maintaining access during construction.
How long will the construction period be?
We're talking several years. The net will be completed in January 2021. The travelers will take longer, so we'll be out there for several years.
So is access going to be obstructed for the entire time, or is it going to be staged? I guess I wanted to ask staff too. If you looked at minimizing this, or is there? What are we doing about this? I guess is the question.
Yes, so I think the kind of fundamental consideration when it came to public access is that while there will be the narrowing of the sidewalk in certain locations, there's a continuity of public access being provided. There's no closure of the bridge in any way beyond what there is at present. So there's the same general level of access for pedestrians and bicyclists is provided, although we all know it's a very busy bridge, and certainly the public will fill the pinch points because of the need for construction staging. But fundamentally, the level of access that's provided will be consistent, and that was a big consideration. And when we get to the recommendation, you'll see that one of the special conditions that we included reinforces that proposal, which was already proposed by the district.
And which special condition is that?
That is in your staff recommendation, special condition 2L4, which is found on page 12.
Okay, 2L4. All right, find it. And then I did notice in the special conditions somewhere it said that they'll provide the plans. It says plan review shall be completed by our behalf on the commission within 45 days after receipt of the plans to be reviewed.
For this project, if you see the special conditions, the page prior to the one I just mentioned, this is a project where we know what the construction staging is going to look like. We're not requiring any additional plan review for this project. The only instance in which the district would need to come back to the staff and get additional plan review would be if they change the construction staging or any aspect of the project. And in that case, that would be where we were looking to make sure that there's no additional impacts to public access beyond what was originally proposed.
Okay, so you're not planning on any further plan review?
Not unless there's a change to the project, which is not what we anticipate.
So if there is a change to the project, which is unanticipated obviously by us and probably unlikely at this point, I admit, what is the purpose of putting in the special conditions plan review shall be completed by on behalf of the commission within 45 days after receipt of the plan is?
It allows sometimes when we have a project that comes to us, we don't have 100% construction documents, or even if we do, just conditions on the ground prove that there's a need to change some aspect of the construction plan. And in those cases, what it does is basically it allows the staff to look at it and make sure that there's no impacts beyond what were considered by the commission. If we found that there was a change to the project that made the potential for a public access impact that we weren't envisioning, that would we would through Larry consider whether it actually required an amendment to the permit, and if it was a significant amendment, it might come back before the commission. This gives us an opportunity to have some flexibility.
That was exactly my concern, as I was thinking that exact chain of thought that you just had.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, well, how would you do that within 45 days? And why, as we a commission, would we put a 45-day limitation on ourselves? Why wouldn't we just say plan review shall be, is that statutory? Or I mean, I'm just curious as to why we wouldn't just say plan review shall be completed by our after the receipt of the plans to be reviewed.
Yeah, that's kind of a customer service thing that that your staff has done over the years. Really, we've many years, not many years ago, I'm not sure exactly how long ago, but at some point, many years ago, I'm being told, we in an attempt to be responsive to applicants and permittees, we put that limitation on ourselves. It's a limitation on staff to do the plan review. It's not a limitation for us to bring it back to the commission for its consideration.
It's not the limitation to bring it back.
Yeah, because we could determine that the plan raises that significant impact, and then we would schedule a commission meeting following that. We would do that within the time on the condition.
All right, thank you. Great project. Glad you're bringing it forward.
There was one more down here, I think. Commissioner McElhaney.
Thank you, Chair Wasserman. First of all, to the families, again, we thank you for being ever present and keeping this a priority for all of us. I wanted to say a few words about Dennis Mulligan. Has just been a fantastic leader on this. I've been in a lot of sessions here and with Dennis over the years. Safety on this bridge and safety on all the toll bridges. He's got some rich history since he left and graduated from UC Berkeley. And from one toll bridge engineer to another, Dennis, your leadership on this has been extremely important to all of us. It's been tough decisions, complex design, the funding package that came together at the federal, state, and local, and the Golden Gate Bridge District as well. It's just I know you've been carrying this for a while, and on behalf of the California State Transportation Agency, and I think all of us, really appreciate your leadership on this, Dennis. And I enjoy seeing the pictures in fabrication. Those are great milestones, and we can see the end coming near. So thank you, Dennis.
Thank you. So I've served on the Golden Gate Bridge District Board for 7 years, and this has been quite a journey. And it's been, I think, probably one of the most challenging projects that's ever become before us as a board. And it's been challenging in a variety of ways. Mr. Gamboa and his wife have been absolutely fantastic supporters of this project. Hearing him speak today, I think, gives you a really strong sense of the strength of the stories from surviving family members. Mr. Gamboa is not alone. We've gone through periods of time where we've heard from many, many, many family members about the impacts on their lives from having a suicide in their family. And it's been a journey for the members of the board, because I think all of us as Bridge District board members were very concerned about the impact to the bridge itself, the visual impacts, the impacts on public access, to change that happens, both visually and just to a structure that we're all used to. But we became so convinced through the compelling testimony that we heard from people about the incredible importance of making a difference to the number of people who come to the bridge wanting to hurt themselves. As a Marin County Supervisor, our Highway Patrol in Marin, our Southern Marin Fire District are very close partners with the Bridge District in addressing safety issues and really helping to address and deal with people who come to the bridge to hurt themselves. But as you heard Mr. Mulligan say, we can't make this bridge completely safe simply by having foot patrols and emergency responders and other professionals try to address and save lives. We had to make this step. And tremendous challenges were involved in coming up with a design that was going to have the least impact on the visual appearance of the bridge, but also be effective. And I really want to shout out both kudos to Dennis Mulligan, but also to the engineering staff of the board. This is tremendously challenging work. And Dan, you'll be glad to know there's a number of videos that really talk about the processing of the different parts of the net that will go into creating the net, but also into building it. And imagine the challenge here. This is a long bridge, and there's also a traveler piece of equipment under the bridge that had to be completely taken out and replaced before you could even start building this bridge. We have mock-ups of the net that are being tested, where people are being trained about how to actually build the net, how to assemble it, and how to make this an impactful project. This is extraordinarily important for our Bay Area. And so, as much as I'm sorry that it had to come back to BCDC, I'm glad that it did, because it's yet another opportunity for people to really understand what the challenge is on the Golden Gate Bridge and how extraordinarily important this project is. And I think, you know, we've tried really hard to come up with a good project, and I think staff and the consulting engineers have done a great job. And I can hardly wait, Mr. Gamboa, till it's in place and we can all celebrate together. Thank you for your support.
I certainly cannot begin to feel or understand the loss and feelings and bewilderment of Mr. Gamboa and the other families who have lost family members jumping off the bridge. I felt a very, very small piece of that a number of years ago, because I did have a partner at my firm who jumped off the bridge. And his body was not found, but his car was found abandoned on the bridge. The other issue that Mr. Gamboa and the other people who have lost family members raise, of course, is far beyond our jurisdiction, and that is the terrible problem of suicide and mental illness, and our absolutely inadequate resources in dealing with that at every level. So I certainly join in supporting this effort, and am pleased. I agree. I'm sorry you had to appear once more, but am pleased to join in the vote to support this very important effort, and wish it all the success in the world. With that, we'll have a presentation of the staff report. Please, Ethan.
Staff recommendation.
Oh, staff recommendation, sorry. Go.
On November 30th, you were mailed a copy of the staff report recommending the Commission authorize the proposed project with conditions. The staff recommends inclusion of special conditions that will require the district to report the results of an avian monitoring to the executive director and implement feasible mitigation measures as determined to be necessary through consultation with Cal Fish and Wildlife and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. To ensure the removal of the temporary fencing as soon as feasible and immediately upon completion of the work, and to require the district to ensure that the same general level of public access exists during construction as it does at present. As conditioned, the staff believes that the project is consistent with your law and Bay Plan policies, and with that, we recommend that you adopt the recommendation.
I'm sorry. Got that?
Who moved?
Peskin, Aaron, Supervisor Peskin, Commissioner Peskin, in this body, and seconded by, thank you. Please call the roll. Hold on. Oh, I'm sorry. Does the applicant accept the conditions and the recommendation?
Yes.
Thank you. His voice is strong, but not that strong.
Yes.
Thank you, Dennis. Now, call the roll, please.
Okay. Commissioner Odiego? Commissioner Butt? Commissioner Gilmore? Commissioner Sharp? Commissioner Gorin? Commissioner Pemberton? Commissioner McGrath? Commissioner Peskin? Commissioner Pine? Commissioner Nelson? Commissioner Sears? Commissioner Showalter? Commissioner Vasquez?
Yes.
Commissioner McElhaney?
Yes.
Commissioner Teichel? Commissioner Wagenknecht? Commissioner Holtzman? Vice Chair Halstead? Chair Wasserman?
Yes.
So we have 19 yes, no no's. Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Commissioner Randolph. Thank you. 20.
Motion passes. Sorry, what?
May I say one thing?
Oh, yes.
So on behalf of BCDC staff, I just want to say that working with Dennis and his staff has been has developed an exceptional product. And we really appreciate them going an extra step, and we really appreciate the way that Dennis and his staff have been able to work with us, and we look forward to continuing to work with them like that in the future. So thank you, Dennis.
That brings us back to item 9, which is a closed session on Westpoint Harbor. We do have one speaker on item 9 who we will hear from before we go into closed session. Raymond Durazo.
As has been stated, my name is Ray Durazo. I'm Vice President of Recreational Boaters of California, RBOC. RBOC is a nonprofit governmental advocacy organization that works to protect and enhance the interests of the state's recreational boaters before the legislative and executive branches of state and local government. With regard to Westpoint Harbor, since its establishment nearly a decade ago, Westpoint Harbor has become a valuable asset to the Bay's boating community. The harbor has been justly recognized by the public, government entities, environmentalists, enthusiasts, and the boating community as a successful marina development which adds significant value to the San Francisco Bay Area, its environment, and recreation. Therefore, RBOC strongly urges the San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission to approve without modification the proposed settlement between BCDC and Westpoint Harbor brought forth by the BCDC staff and the Commission's Enforcement Committee. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Item 9 itself is, as noted on the agenda, is a closed session regarding the litigation brought against BCDC by Mark Sanders and Westpoint Harbor, LLC, and the Enforcement Committee's recommended enforcement decision regarding Westpoint Harbor. For the closed session, the Commission will move to the Claremont Room, which is through the doorway to my right. You all can remain in this room or not, at your choice. We shall rejoin you as soon as we are finished. We are back in session, and therefore I'm taking my hat off. We have completed closed session regarding Westpoint Harbor, and we did not take a reportable action. That brings us to item 10, which is consideration and possible vote on the Enforcement Committee's recommended enforcement decision regarding Westpoint Harbor, proposed settlement agreement between the Commission and Westpoint Harbor LLC. And the Enforcement Committee's recommendation will be introduced by Commissioner Greg Scharf, who is chair of the Enforcement Committee.
Thank you. Our recommended decision was to adopt the Executive Director's recommended enforcement decision, which was dated October 26, 2018, and the 4 attachments to that decision.
Sorry, I apologize. That was my fault.
Okay. You don't need me to repeat that, do you? Oh, that's fine. I just said.
That's even better.
I just said our recommended enforcement decision was to adopt your recommended enforcement decision. I assume there's no objection to that.
Mark's going to read it. Mark, will you please? If you'd stop fooling with my mic. Mark, will you please make the staff presentation?
Yes, good afternoon, Commissioners. After the Commission considered this matter in March 15th, you remanded it to the Enforcement Committee. BCDC staff and Westpoint Harbor engaged in a series of meetings and discussions in an effort to see if we could resolve the matter or at least narrow the issues. We met a number of times and engaged in protracted discussions, and slowly but surely, one issue after another, we did come to an agreement on 2 documents. One was an amendment to the permit for Westpoint Harbor, which is referred to as Amendment 10, and the second was a proposed settlement agreement, which is before you today. The settlement is a compromise of disputed claims and a lot of issues, and it's not necessarily perfect, and not necessarily everybody. I think both sides were not happy with all aspects of it, but on balance, we think it's a fair and reasonable resolution of the claims. I will touch briefly just on a few points related to Amendment 10, and then summarize the key provisions of the proposed settlement agreement. Amendment 10 is an attachment to the proposed settlement agreement. It has been signed by Westpoint Harbor and also by the Executive Director, issued as a non-material amendment, just as all the prior amendments to this permit. It was only the very original permit in 2001 that was a major permit that was voted on by the Commission. But I would also note that the settlement agreement contains a provision in paragraph 16 that if the Commission provides comments or recommendations that it believes should be addressed in the permit, that the parties will negotiate in good faith to address those concerns. I'm not going to go through each and every aspect of the changes that were made in the permit amendment, but there were a couple of issues that the Enforcement Committee discussed and asked for some follow-up, and so I'd like to address those, and then one other issue. One issue was it was unclear at the Enforcement Committee regarding the channel markers and the no-wake zone signs in West Point Slough, and Westpoint Harbor submitted a supplemental letter yesterday with documentation on this point and with information, photographs showing the signs and showing the channel markers, and in our view has addressed that concern. I believe that Counsel for Westpoint Harbor will show some photographs and address that issue in more detail. The second issue is that the committee asked for some follow-up on was the issue of shorebird roost habitat in the what's known as Pond 10, immediately south of Westpoint Harbor. And on that, again, Westpoint Harbor, in the letter we got yesterday, they submitted some documentation, some photographs, as well as a letter from an environmental consulting firm, a biologist, who talks about both literature review and visual observations from a visit that documents that, in fact, this remainder of Pond 10 is today providing shorebird roost habitat. And I will let Westpoint Harbor, they'll go over that a little bit in more detail and show you some pictures. But I'd like to just give a little bit more background on this point, just for the commission's benefit. The permit requires that shorebird roost habitat be provided as a permit condition to compensate for the loss of some shorebird roost habitat that was lost when the marina was created. In its statement of defense, Westpoint Harbor submitted a memorandum from Cargill from 2003, in which Cargill said that they were managing Pond 10 and would manage Pond 10 for birds. They would modify the water levels to address concerns. So when we were going through our negotiations in April, we reached out to Cargill, staff did, and Cargill essentially, in my view, repudiated their position that they had taken in 2003. They said that the memo was not a firm commitment, that they expected Westpoint Harbor to come back and negotiate a further agreement, which may have been the case, but when pushed, they went on to say that looking forward, they were not willing to make any commitments or enter in any discussions going forward that they would manage Pond 10 in a certain way. So we felt that certainly the proposed penalty for that violation should not be imposed, and further that equitably it wouldn't be right to require Westpoint Harbor to look for off-site mitigation. If you look at the permit findings and on page 49 and 50, and as well as Redwood City's use permit, it's clear that everyone envisioned that this mitigation would be provided just south of Westpoint Harbor at this remainder of Pond 10. So that's that issue. The final issue that I'd like to address is dredging. The amended permit authorizes a limited amount of dredging, 150,000 cubic yards over a 2-year period. This is one example of how the resolution of this dispute goes far beyond just resolving the enforcement action. Westpoint Harbor had submitted a dredging application in April of 2017. Staff had indicated last November that we felt that an environmental assessment was needed, and Westpoint Harbor declined to do that, and their counsel submitted a letter disputing our view and saying that they didn't feel that an environmental assessment was required under CEQA. So we went back and forth on that, but eventually reached agreement when Westpoint Harbor agreed to substantially reduce the scope of the dredging project. The original project was 500,000 cubic yards over a 10-year period. The reduced project that's authorized is 150,000 cubic yards over a 2-year period. And so we felt with that change that we were comfortable concluding that project was categorically exempt under CEQA as a minor alteration to land. And I would just comment that a number of the comment letters on this have said, well, the original authorization was for 50,000 cubic yards a year over 10 years. Now we're authorizing more than that, 75,000 cubic yards over 2 years. But as the commission may know, dredging doesn't really work that way. The original authorization would have authorized 3 episodes, really, in years 1, 5, and 10, for example, of 150,000 cubic yards each time. So this is what's been approved is 1 episode of dredging the harbor and the entrance channel out to the main slough. There have been some comments raised on the CEQA issues related to that, and all I can say is that we're well aware of those CEQA issues. We carefully examined them. We negotiated and argued with them about them with Counsel for Westpoint Harbor, and that staff is comfortable that the executive director properly determined that it was this work was categorically exempt under CEQA. I'd also like to just briefly come back to the issue of this being a non-material amendment that was approved by the executive director. Under the regulations, section 10822, the executive director shall approve a non-material amendment if it's consistent with the commission's laws and policies and will not result in a material alteration of the project. Here, we don't think that it was a material alteration of the project because the amendment essentially modifies a number of compliance dates for certain improvements. It makes minor modifications to required public access. But in terms of what's newly authorized, the amendment authorizes some existing small structures. It authorizes relocation of temporary structures associated with 101 surf sports. It authorizes 150 cubic yards of fill to improve shoreline appearance, where Westpoint Harbor will construct a kayak launch and stabilize an area where there had been a slope failure. And it authorizes the dredging, as I just discussed. One of the Commission's regulations on the Commission's reg on what is non-material references two other provisions. One for minor fill for improving shoreline appearance, and one of the examples is installation of protective work such as riprap, which we think covers the fill for the beach. And then for dredging, administrative permit for new dredging may be authorized if it's less than 200,000 cubic yards of fill over 10 years. Just as a comparison, in October, the staff issued as an administrative permit to the Port of Redwood City a project that would authorize new work dredging of 21,000 cubic yards of new dredging and 200,000 cubic yards of maintenance dredging. Another example from October of this year was to the city and county of San Francisco for 22,000 cubic yards of new work and over 400,000 cubic yards of maintenance dredging. So again, we're comfortable that this qualifies as a non-material amendment. Turning to the agreement, just the key terms. One paragraph requires Westpoint Harbor agrees that they will comply fully with the permit. There's a provision, paragraph 2, that the enforcement proceedings will be terminated if the commission approves the agreement. However, I would note that there's a reservation of rights by which BCDC and the executive director and the commission reserve the right to take appropriate enforcement action for future violations. As I've mentioned, the agreement encompasses much more than resolution of the enforcement action. In particular, it resolves some litigation. Westpoint Harbor filed a lawsuit against the commission a year ago, actually August of 2007. Well, that was when they submitted a PRA request, Public Records Act request. We responded. They felt the response was inadequate and filed a lawsuit which remains pending in San Francisco Superior Court. And if the settlement is approved, that lawsuit would be dismissed. In August of this year, they submitted another set of PRA requests that are there was actually 15 separate requests. We've had some meet and confer discussions on those requests, but haven't really responded. We've deferred further discussion pending this hearing, but if the agreement is approved, that would be withdrawn. We wouldn't have to respond, whereas there is a possibility that could result in future litigation. The agreement also provides for a joint statement by the commission and the executive director announcing the settlement if it is approved by the commission. And the executive director and Westpoint Harbor have in fact agreed to a joint statement that will be released if the commission approves the agreement. The agreement also provides that the parties will agree not to make further public statements relating to the subject matter of the agreement other than the joint statement. So the last topic the last subject matter in the settlement is the issue of payments. the Enforcement Committee in November of 2017 adopted the prior Executive Director recommendation with a penalty of $513,000, but also allowed that there could be a possible waiver of 50% of that penalty for full compliance. The settlement agreement, under the settlement agreement, there would be a penalty, or excuse me, not a penalty. It requires 2 payments by Westpoint Harbor in the total amount of $150,000. $75,000 would go to the Bayfill Cleanup and Abatement Fund, which BCDC would then transfer to the California Coastal Conservancy to be used however they desire. The second $75,000 would be paid to the Marine Science Institute, who were here earlier today. In terms of the total payment amount, in settlement discussions, staff agreed that it would be appropriate to withdraw proposed penalties for certain of the alleged violations where we determined that no further action was required, such as the shorebird roost habitat, and there were a number of other issues. We also agreed that the penalty or the payment amount should be reduced, or penalty should be withdrawn, or violations should be withdrawn for violations where we had agreed in Amendment 10 to authorize previously unauthorized improvements or to amend the permit in ways that were mutually acceptable. So these payments is somewhat different than is typical in resolving enforcement actions, in that, although I have misspoke now perhaps twice, the payments are not a penalty. They are not a penalty because, first, if the Commission approves the agreement, the enforcement action will be terminated. And second, that this is a settlement of disputed claims with no admission of liability. While it's not a penalty, it's also not a charitable contribution. Providing for payments rather than imposing a penalty is unusual, but it is not unique. In 2012, the Commission entered into a settlement agreement to resolve an enforcement action with an entity called Ford Point LLC in the city of Richmond, which required the payment of a contribution to the Bay Trail project. So in conclusion, I would note that many of the comments that have been received on this matter relate to Amendment 10. But Amendment 10 is not actually before you today. You may have questions about Amendment 10 that you'd like staff to address or Westpoint Harbor to address, and we're happy to do so. But what's before you today is the proposed settlement agreement. That agreement, as I said, is a compromise of disputed claims and a reasonable resolution of many issues that include but go beyond the enforcement action. Staff's recommendation is to support the Enforcement Committee and their recommendation, and that the Commission adopt the proposed settlement agreement between the Commission and Westpoint Harbor. I'm happy to answer questions at the appropriate time, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. There may be questions, but I think we're going to take public comments. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize. Westpoint Harbor, please.
Commissioners, I have a slideshow, so we'll pull that up. Does it get presented on that? Technological difficulties are the story of my life, so this makes sense.
We see it.
Oh, you do?
Just so
On
you
your
know, we
screens?
see it.
You see it?
Yeah, but it needs to be up there too.
I know, just so you know. There it is.
All good? So, Commissioners, my name is Kevin Vickers. I'm here with my colleague Navi Dillon on behalf of Westpoint Harbor. I have just a few high-level points, and then I want to address some questions that were raised at the Enforcement Committee meeting last month. Some of this information, in fact, all the information that's in the slideshow is in your packets in the letter that Chief Counsel Zappatello referenced. So, high-level points.
I'm not going to belabor this, but the site is an excellent site. It was named 2018 Marina of the Year for all of North America just a couple days ago. It's a very impressive facility. I know that at the commission meeting in March, a lot of this was covered. So again, I'm not going to belabor it. I just want to highlight that that's what we're talking about here. The settlement agreement itself, the proposal before you, it's a path forward. It's certainly not perfect from Westpoint Harbor's point of view. We hotly contest the issues in this case. Nonetheless, there's a lot of work that went into this. There were many months of meetings. We dove into the details with staff. We reached a reasonable good faith compromise to get where we are. I think that it's in the public interest to approve this settlement agreement for multiple reasons, not least of which it'll conserve BCDC staff resources, it'll conserve Westpoint Harbor resources so that both entities can focus on going forward, protecting the bay, having public access for Bay Area communities. To address the two issues that the Enforcement Committee asked about last month. First one was no wake signage to alert boaters that Westpoint Slough, the area just in front of the harbor there, the channel just in front of the harbor there, is a no wake zone. There are four signs that alert boaters to that. You can see the location of those signs in the orange dots that are there on the map. The other pins are navigational buoys that direct the channel that boats must follow when coming into and leaving the harbor. Those navigational buoys generally direct boats away from Greco Island, so not only is there no wake protection, there's also navigation protection to keep boats away from Greco Island. This is a photo of the no wake buoy that's at the intersection between Redwood Creek and Westpoint Slough. This is a close-up of that same buoy. I'll note that there's two protections here. Number one, there's a speed limit of 10 miles per hour. That's set by Redwood City ordinance, and it applies to all sloughs within Redwood City jurisdiction. Number two, there's a no wake limitation. Boats cannot violate either of those two restrictions. This is a photo of the no wake zone sign that's located at the entrance to the marina. This is a photo of the second no wake sign located very near that first one at the entrance of the marina. This is the third, same text, no wake zone sign. This is a photo of the sign that's located at the boat launch ramp where boats that are sometimes guests, sometimes regular users of the marina, can launch from a trailer. The sign contains several bullets, but two that are of particular relevance here. It says Westpoint Channel is a no wake zone, and it says public access is restricted on Greco Island. This is a quote, and again, this is in the packet of information you all have. This is a quote from the binding contract that all boaters that have a slip at Westpoint Harbor have to sign. It says that Westpoint Slough is a no wake zone, and it says that boaters must not approach Greco Island. Again, violation of this is grounds for termination of your slip rights at Westpoint Harbor. The second issue that the Enforcement Committee asked Westpoint Harbor to provide some information about was the Pond 10 area south of Westpoint Harbor and whether it was functioning as shorebird roost habitat. This is just an overview. It shows where Pond 10 area is. It's that large section of that's partly underwater and has some dry areas just south of the marina. There's a report that details this and has many more photos, but here's a photo of, hard to say exactly how many, hundreds of shorebirds roosting in Pond 10. This was a video that I was going to play that showed shorebirds foraging and roosting in Pond 10, but unfortunately, as I mentioned, I have a lot of technological difficulties in my life, and this is one of them. It just appears as a photo. The same, another photo, shorebirds roosting in Pond 10. Again, there's more in the packet of information that was provided. We wanted to make sure there was no doubt that Pond 10 served as roost habitat, so in addition to having the photographic evidence of birds actually using it to roost, we commissioned a consultant to go out there and do an assessment. The conclusion from the report is that Pond 10 continues to provide roost habitat for shorebirds adjacent to Westpoint Harbor Marina. That's it. I wanted to make sure that we address the Enforcement Committee's request completely. If you have any questions, we're available as a resource. We urge you to adopt the recommended settlement. Again, it'll conserve resources, it'll put us on the right path going forward. Westpoint Harbor and BCDC can hopefully be partners in public access and protection of the bay.
Thank you. We will now hear from the public. I'm going to start with Arthur Feinstein and Brian Gaffney from the Sierra Club. Gentlemen, I'm going to give you collectively 8 minutes. You may divide it up any way you like. Eight.
Commissioners, Brian Gaffney for Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge. The last time this matter was before you in March, there was a $513,000 proposed penalty because of past historical non-compliance with the permit conditions. In October 26, we got notice that in 10 days it would be before the Enforcement Commission, and things had drastically changed. Now, Permit 10, through an amendment, allows a helicopter pad to be installed. 2,600 square foot helicopter. There will be elimination of the requirement for 3 acres of Pond 10 mitigation. Mitigation's gone. There will be elimination of a requirement to build a fence on the south side. That requirement no longer stands after all these years. In addition, the wake signage that you saw there allows it says 10 miles an hour. And there had been a condition as well that there be buoys up 100 feet from Greco Island, and that's been eliminated. In addition, dredging will happen. Dredging, which was never permitted, dredging, which Fish and Wildlife Service commented when this installation was built in 2001 and 2002, they recommended against it because of the environmental impact. So under the California Environmental Quality Act, the project is the whole of the action. So these are the components of the action. And this is not a non-material or administrative amendment. And the reasons for that are because of the significant environmental impact, your regulations say it's not, because it'll modify existing permit conditions, it cannot be a non-material administrative permit, and it's going to reduce the public benefits because of the environmental impacts. Now, location's important. In a categorical exemption, location matters. And here you're right across from Greco Island. We know that in the water there's endangered species, including longfin smelt. There's salmonids. We know that there's the salt marsh harvest mouse, which is endangered of extinction. There's clapper rail, now called Ridgway's rail, and there's the least tern. And so under CEQA, there needs to be environmental review. Here, we don't even know the basic elements. What dredging will occur where will be told afterwards. What the baseline is of what's out there from information back to 2006 will be in a report after the dredging happens. And any environmental analysis, which has never happened, this dredging project's never been looked at for its environmental impacts, will happen after the fact. And so the proper course of action here is for this commission to follow its own regulations and CEQA. And that would require that the applicant get all the local discretionary permits before he approaches BCDC, that this go out to all the state and federal resource agencies and come before the commission, and that there be an environmental assessment of these serious impacts because of the sensitive habitat area. I could go on further. In fact, one point I might make is that the helicopter pads, the enforcement decision said that it was going to be justified because the helicopters were going to be used to eradicate the Spartina weed. In your packet, there's a letter from the Coastal Conservancy said, no, we're not using helicopters. 2016, we stopped that. So we don't know what's causing this, but this is a big problem, and your regulations and the McAteer-Petrie Act are not being followed.
Thank you, sir.
That's going to tell me. Great. Chairman and Commissioners, hi, I'm Arthur Feinstein. And I'm representing the Citizens Committee to Complete the Refuge and also the Sierra Club. At the enforcement hearing, David Lewis made this amazing statement to me, to you. It was amazing because it was so strong. But he was saying, this is an entity. Well, let me start off first. I've been coming to BCDC for 30 years, 40 years, trusted BCDC of all the agencies to actually do something good for the Bay, and you used to. No more after this, because you've given away the store. But David Lewis said, well, what's happened here? You have an applicant who is willing to spend God knows how much money on how many lawyers, it must be 7 or 8, to plague you constantly, has made numerous PRA requests and is sued over that. It's gone to Sacramento, and you now have an audit going, and you've turned tail and run away. And that's how you're viewed here by any environmentalist you talk to. And what we're expecting to see after this is that anybody who has money is going to say, hey, BCDC's easy. I got lawyers. I got political pull. We just threatened them. Boop. We got our whole permit. I mean, what do? You gave them everything they wanted, and the Bay gets nothing. Pond 10, nobody paid for anything. Cargill was just using it as it was, and now they've told you that they're not going to manage it for the mitigation. So, you know, all those shorebirds and those pretty pictures, 5 years, no more. And you got nothing you can do about it. So as mitigation, you know, it's pathetic. It doesn't really exist. It's just what is going to happen there, and you have no say in it. The wake, 10 miles an hour, you get a heck of a lot of wake. 5 miles an hour is what usually is asked in a no-wake zone. Why you depend on Redwood City, who knows? But think about where you are. Greco Island is one of the richest resources in the entire Bay. One of the densest population of clapper rails. It's got salt marsh harvest mouse. We got harbor port seals. I mean, the number of listed species that is in that area is immense. And wake cause a real problem to wetlands and marshes. And when the marshes erode, which is what wake does, not only is it destroying the marsh, but there's lots of studies now about greenhouse gases and how tidal marshes sequester carbon. When they erode, they release that carbon. So by this permit, you're actually encouraging greenhouse gases because it is eroding now. You've seen a paper, I think you have, that shows that Greco Island is actually eroding as a result of wakes. 5 miles an hour. When the enforcement hearing came up, there were no signs out at the head of the channel. We brought that up. We brought a picture that said, you could see, Baykeeper took it. No buoy. That was part of the permit. Now you're saying, permittee says he will fulfill all obligations. This permittee has not fulfilled any of his obligations for 15 years. And now you're giving him another shot and saying, and we're not going to be able to do anything about it. You can guess what I'm urging you to do, which is do not accept this settlement. Thank you.
I have a comment to the speaker. First of all, sir, I don't know you and you don't know me, but to characterize my decision as a coward, I don't appreciate that at all.
Okay,
You said
I guess
We are not going to engage in dialogue. I'm sorry. I understand the importance and force of your feeling. Arthur, we're not going to engage in dialogue. Thank
Okay,
you, sir.
I'm happy not to.
Thank you. The next speaker is Helen Walter.
Good afternoon. I'm Helen Walter. I'm with the Committee for Green Foothills. Okay. Hi, Helen Walter with Committee for Green Foothills. Thank you for your consideration on this topic today. I have been watching this issue for some time. We recognize that it is a contentious issue. We realize that. However, we are concerned by the environmental precedent that would be set with this agreement. And I realize that it is a compromise, and everyone loses something in a compromise. But to disregard CEQA does set quite a negative precedent, particularly with the helicopter pad. The shorebirds that are on Greco Island and how close, when you actually Google map the helipad and see how close it is to Greco Island, it's like your next door neighbor, basically. You know, when they put up the fence and you're cranky about the fence. Unfortunately, Greco Island doesn't have their birds, can't come to the meetings. And these birds are 4-ounce slough balls. You know, they're trying to gain weight to migrate and to breed. So we need to make sure that, you know, that in a compromise that the birds are protected as well. So things like a helipad should definitely be mitigated in some way, or removed. You know, the other issues I'm concerned about for precedent with any development coming into the Bay. You guys understand that developers watch and see what they can do. And so to ignore CEQA in a compromise could set a dangerous precedent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sonia Boggs.
Hello. I just want to thank the BCDC and Westpoint Harbor for their efforts to reach a resolution. I actually came today just to say that I wanted to voice my support of the proposed settlement agreement without modification, but I'd like to take this opportunity to just clarify one thing that seems to be confusing people. Based on the no-wake zone and the 10-mile-per-hour buoy, when you're a mariner, a no-wake zone means that you cannot exceed a speed that creates a wake. So for most people, they'll never exceed 5 miles per hour if they're in a large boat, because that means they're creating a wake and therefore in violation. And as Mr. Vickers tried to point out, that sign is actually telling mariners two things, not just that it's a 10-mile-per-hour speed limit. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug Furman.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Doug Furman. I'm a harbor master at Westpoint Harbor. This has been a long process, and I think it's time to put these issues behind us. I would encourage you to support the recommended settlement. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bob Wilson.
Thank you. I'm Bob Wilson, co-founder of the San Francisco Bay Stewardship Alliance. The Alliance promotes informed conservation and responsible development of the San Francisco Bay shoreline for the enjoyment of all today and for future generations. A great 20th century philosopher said, sometimes you can't get everything you want, but sometimes you can get what you need. And the Alliance recommends that the Commission adopt the Westpoint Harbor settlement as is, because we need it. We need it as a community. We need it for our environment. It's not in the public's interest, it's not in the environment's interest to continue the dispute, nor to risk further delay and even more wasted resources by making any modifications to this agreement. Both sides have worked in good faith since the last time we were here, and they have found an equitable resolution. The proposed contributions to the nonprofit shouldn't be ignored. This agreement is a creative way to ensure both the environment and our community benefit directly from this settlement. We'd also like to thank the Friends of Westpoint Harbor and the over 5,300 people who signed their petition calling for an end to this disagreement. The Alliance also wants to thank Dave Pine, who's left, for helping bring both sides to the table. His leadership helped break the deadlock and hammer out a fair settlement. The Alliance also wants to thank the staff, the BCDC staff, for working with Mr. Sanders and Westpoint Harbor over many months to create this solution. The dispute has dragged on for far too long, costing millions of dollars to be needlessly wasted in private and public funds. It's time now to move forward and for both sides to focus on continuing their good work to improve the San Francisco Bay Estuary, the public's access to it, for now and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Maureen O'Connor Sanders.
BCDC Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity. I am Maureen O'Connor Sanders. My husband, Mark Sanders, owns Westpoint Harbor. Last March, the Commission tasked BCDC staff and Westpoint Harbor with a seemingly insurmountable task. Work together to resolve long-standing permit errors and inconsistencies and alleged permit violations. BCDC staff and Westpoint Harbor met for the past 9 months to do just that. I was invited to sit in and did so at most but not all of the meetings. The process was very challenging. The actual meetings, of course, but also trying to understand each issue, the other's point of view, and supporting evidence. Hundreds of hours have been spent researching the permit details, BCDC Westpoint Harbor history, documents, timelines, CEQA, federal, state, and maritime law, and the on-site marina facility itself. These people, the BCDC and Westpoint Harbor teams, understand the big picture and the minutia better than anyone else in this room. I believe they should be thanked and congratulated on crafting an amendment and settlement agreement that provides a framework for moving forward productively. God knows both parties have better things to do with their time and resources than to dwell on problems that they've resolved. I ask that the commissioners pay most attention to, give most credence to, the BCDC staff and Westpoint Harbor team's input. They are saying the impasse was not insurmountable, and they did what they were asked to do. They crafted Amendment 10 that clears up and cleans up the permit, and a settlement agreement that both parties can live with and move forward. Please vote to approve the agreement without modification or delay. There is nothing to be gained by snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Blackmore.
Chair Wasserman, Commissioners, thank you for your time. I'm Peter Blackmore, one of the co-founders of the San Francisco Bay Stewardship Alliance. You've heard from Bob our role. The Alliance firmly recommends the Commission adopt the Westpoint Harbor settlement without modifications. As you've heard, both parties have spent many months and millions of dollars getting to this point. In the case of Westpoint, over $1.4 million from them. It's a huge amount of money. In addition, both sides have worked diligently since the Enforcement Hearing Committee meeting a month ago to review the few items that were raised there. People have been working very hard. Our view is it clearly is not in the public's interest to continue this dispute, which would cause, obviously, further unnecessary delay and further cost. Importantly, I would remind everyone that Westpoint Harbor is a model marina with the highest standards to protect the environment. We encourage anyone who thinks differently to visit the marina and see for themselves. The fact the marina was just presented with the prestigious North America Harbor of the Year Award this week speaks volumes. That is an award which is fought over very hard. And please note that environmental standards are the key criteria of many in this award. The Alliance thanks the BCD staff and Mr. Sanders and the Westpoint Harbor team for the work over the many months to create the settlement. It is now time to move forward and for both sides to focus on continuing to improve the whole history. The Alliance urges you to approve this settlement without further delay and without any change. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, sir. John Zucker.
Good afternoon. I'm John Zucker, and I'm with Friends of Westpoint Harbor. And I'll say I had the same 10 days to read that document that everybody else had. And I thought it was pretty creative. There were some new twists in there that I hadn't seen before, and I thought the whole thing was very reasonable. It represented quite a good work product between Westpoint Harbor and your staff, and I think they should be commended on the work that they did. And thank you very much for all that. Regarding the roosting habitat, we've seen a lot of evidence that a contractual provision for a replacement habitat is not necessary. Excuse me. If the habitat, or anything else for that matter, becomes a problem in the future, I think we have a newfound spirit of cooperation that we can rely on that can be addressed by BCDC and Westpoint Harbor working together to handle just about anything that comes up. We don't need to make a provision for every little thing in every contract that we make. In the meantime, I agree with Maureen. You instructed the Enforcement Committee in Westpoint Harbor to go back to the drawing board and come to a compromise. And they did that. They produced the work product known as Amendment 10. And we have agreement. We hope you will acknowledge that today by accepting Amendment 10 as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. The last speaker is Kenneth Parker. Mr. Parker? All right. Oh. No, that's okay. I just...
Well, reasonably quick.
Stepping beyond the curtain, so to speak.
As you may guess, I'm a little more comfortable behind the camera than out here, so. Okay, where's my, is that my V2? Got the real glasses on. It's the one with the birds. That's it. Okay, so what I'd like to start with is a video, because Kevin couldn't show his. And this is roosting habitat this year at Pond 10. So, if you could go ahead. Okay, and I just wanted that to be fairly short and sweet, but just, this is current, as it exists, roost habitat at Pond 10. I won't go into detail about, you know, crawling through the mud to get the close-up of the bird. I'll leave that one alone. But realistically, for the last 15 years, Pond 10 has been this way, and the roost habitat exists now. And if I understand this process correctly, and I'm sure you guys would correct me if I'm wrong, if there's going to be a permit issued for the remainder of Pond 10, will they not have to get permission from you to do it, so that you, in fact, the BCDC commissioners, will be the ones who decide whether or not they must then have mitigation for the entire Pond 10 anyway? So it exists now. If they're going to change it, they have to get your permission to do it. There's one other factual point that some other people brought up, and I'm a detail-obsessed specifist, I apologize. But the helipad that everybody's so upset over, that's not at Westpoint Harbor. That's on Cargill property, not Westpoint Harbor. Mark doesn't own that. So that was my brief bit. I said this at the enforcement hearing, and I think it deserves to be said again, which is, last March, you guys charged the enforcement committee and enforcement staff with a task. You said, go back, fix this, find a solution, get the job done. They took you at your word. They went out and they did it. So I think that's laudable. And I just want to thank all of you for your service, because this is how our government works, and I appreciate it.
Before entertaining commissioners' questions, I want to make a couple of things clear, both to the public and to the commission.
Close the public hearing?
I'm sorry?
Close the public hearing?
There is no public hearing.
Oh, that's right.
And if we should have had a public hearing, you let me blow it. But this is in the, yeah, that's right, we'll let it go. I want to make a couple of things clear. One, the issue before the commission this afternoon is the recommendation of the enforcement committee, not Amendment 10, which has been issued. Two, the settlement agreement, which is part of the enforcement committee's recommendation, does call for potential comments on the from the commission on Amendment 10. I want to divide our discussion this afternoon and focus first on the action on the recommendation. And once we have taken that, then if there are comments that people wish to make today on Amendment 10, to do so. This is not the last opportunity to do that, and there are a number of forums to do that. The other thing I would like to do before we open it to the commission to ask questions is to be clear about what our choices of action are this afternoon, because they are fairly limited in this context of a recommendation from the Enforcement Committee. Take it away, David.
David Alderson with the California Attorney General's Office. You have several options today. The first one is you can adopt the Enforcement Committee's recommended enforcement decision without any change. Two, you can just dismiss this whole proceeding entirely. Three, you can remand the matter to the Enforcement Committee for further action as you would direct. And 4, you can reject the recommended enforcement decision and decide to consider the entire matter de novo, presumably at a later date.
Presumably.
Those are the options.
I will now entertain questions from the commission. I'm going to start from the right this time, just to be different. There are none. There is one. Commissioner Nelson.
Just trying to clarify, I hear you, Chair Wasserman, and I just want to make sure that I have the right issues in the right buckets. So Mr. Gaffney and some of the folks testifying have talked about dredging and impacts regarding to Greco Island, wake issues about fencing, and about the helicopter. Those are laid out in Mr. Gaffney's letter. My understanding is that those are all related to the amendment, not to the settlement. So I just want to make sure that those issues, you're bifurcating our discussion here, and those issues are, I have comments, but I'm going to hold off on those, right?
I appreciate that. My answer is yes, but I would defer to an attorney representing us.
That's correct.
Thank you.
The second issue that I'm less clear about, and that is exactly who's responsible for the ongoing management of Pond 10, of the roosting habitat. Is that?
That's a second bucket question.
Okay. Then my first comment on, my only comment on the settlement, the first half of this discussion, is that my instincts, honestly, are that this enforcement action, these violations have gone on for so long that my instincts are to ask staff to proceed, frankly, pretty aggressively. There are, once a decade or so, we see a violation that takes a long time to resolve. And I'm really concerned about that. I mean, our permits are only as good as the enforcement of those permits. So my instincts are that we should be very aggressive in enforcing this violation that goes on so long. That said, I'm going to wait for the discussion, decide how to vote on the motion.
Any other comments or questions? Sure.
Sure. I'll move that we approve the enforcement committee's decision.
Second.
Oh,
Adopt. Adopt is the correct word.
I'm sorry, who's?
Gilmore, who was second?
No.
Tekel.
Okay.
Any discussion on the motion? Well, just so we don't disappoint Commissioner Nelson. I certainly share Commissioner Nelson's concern. This is obviously, as a number of the speakers have said, a very difficult situation. It is not a situation in which fault is only on one side. You don't get settlements when that's the case. And I want to recognize and say that certainly for me and my vote, which will be to support the motion, the efforts of staff, who I do not believe are 100% thrilled with this, and you've heard the applicant's representative say that the applicant is not 100% thrilled with this. I also want to note the very significant efforts of Commissioner Pine to bring resolution to this, so strenuous that the lawyers decided he couldn't participate in the actual decision. Position I do not like, I will say for the record. And the efforts of the Enforcement Committee. And I agree that compromises are not satisfactory to everybody, and they're not fully satisfactory to everybody. I think this is a time where this compromise is appropriate, and so I will be supporting the motion. Any other comments?
For those of you who don't know, I'm not only a boater, windsurfer, I represent windsurfers, and I actually reported this violation from a complaint that I got many years ago. I'm not happy that it took 8 years after construction started for public access for those that I work with to finally be realized. But now that it has, I'm going to support this. There is a significant disincentive here fiscally in the amount of work. It may not be what I would have voted for or argued for on the enforcement committee, but given a choice, and I remember very clearly the last time this was before, I thought the staff was overreaching in some areas where the areas where I did agree they weren't in compliance with the permit, but it didn't matter all that much. And I think there have been significant concessions on that. I think now that the public access is open, that's the main goal. So for those reasons, and the fact that there is a significant economic penalty for having gone on, not as significant as I would have argued for, so maybe you never want me on the enforcement committee, even though I'm a voter, but because there might have been higher payments, if not a penalty. Nonetheless, I think it's important to put this behind us, and for that reason, I'll support the work of my fellow commissioners.
Hearing or seeing no other hands, hearing no other comments and seeing no other hands. Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Adiego? Yes. Commissioner Butt?
Yes.
Commissioner Gilmore? Yes. Commissioner Scharf?
Yes.
Commissioner Gorin? Yes. Commissioner Pemberton? Yes. Commissioner McGrath?
Yes.
Commissioner Peskin? Uh-oh.
Absent.
We just missed
Oh.
it. We just missed it.
Okay, hold on. Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Randolph? Commissioner Showalter? Commissioner Vasquez?
Yes.
Commissioner McElhaney? Yes. Commissioner Techko? Commissioner Holtzman? No.
Absent.
Okay. Vice Chair Halstead? And Chairman Wasserman?
Yes.
15 votes yes.
The motion passes. The recommendation of the Enforcement Committee is adopted. We are going to postpone item 12, the briefing on Environmental Justice Bay Plan Amendment, to our meeting, first meeting in January. Sorry? Oh, sorry. Thank you. I apologize. Now we can deal with the second bucket. It is late. This is not your only opportunity. But if there are comments or questions that you feel you want to make at this time regarding the amendment that has been issued, that would be appropriate.
I do have one fairly brief comment. I was concerned not about the narrowing of the pathway, because very often a 10-foot path can be narrow, but the combination of narrowing a pathway and allowing public utilities within it. I reread and I found under condition 15, the utilities within the public access area, that there's a limitation to the encroachment of 20%. So I want you guys to make sure that that occurs, and also as a practical matter, make sure that there aren't conflicts. Depends on heavy use. So that's something that can be weighed if there are any other further amendments, if we might have to make an adjustment. But at the moment, I'm assured that there's a protection for access on that. So,
Commissioner Nelson.
Two questions for staff. The first is, Mr. Gaffney's letter raises concerns about the categorical exemption on the amendment with regard to helicopter fencing, the wakes, dredging.
Barry, can I hold?
Susan?
Wait, Susan. Sorry, before you leave, we're going to continue the comments, but I'm going to formally ask for the motion to adjourn the meeting so that we have enough votes to do so. We have a motion from Commissioner Scharf.
Second.
Commissioner Nelson seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no, and the abstentions can stay. But we are going to stay for a couple of more comments. Thank you, Susan. Go ahead, Barry.
So first, Mark, when you spoke about the exemption, you raised examples of other dredging permit applications that have been granted administratively. And I frankly, the applicants are correct that dredging in one area, the folks who testified today are correct. Dredging in one area may have very different impacts from dredging in a different area. So can you clarify for us staff's position with regard to the categorical exemption concerns that Gaffney raised, not just with regard to dredging in general, but dredging in this location and helicopter wakes, et cetera?
Yes, I'll try to do that, and if I leave something out, you can remind me. In terms of the dredging, when we were arguing that the project was not categorically exempt, one of the things that we did take into account was the location and the proximity to the refuge. So we were concerned about that, and we were aware of that. But again, we felt that with the reduction in the scope of the project, and also I didn't mention, but it's in the packet, that the consultant for Westpoint Harbor, Anchor QA, they submitted a memorandum where they did an air photo interpretation or analysis of the shoreline of Greco Island over the time from before the harbor was created until the present, and came to the conclusion that the operation of the harbor had not had any impact. The creation of the harbor and the dredging that was associated with that at the time had not had any impact. So, it's ultimately, we believe is within the discretion of the agency, and we did take that into account. I mean, we were aware of the refuge next door, and that was part of our concern with the larger project. But we felt that it was addressed. And the other, another issue that is in the special conditions is that that I didn't mention is that Westpoint Harbor has agreed to do 3 years of data collection post dredging, bathymetric surveys and air photo analysis, and to prepare a report. And our thought was that that information will be more useful probably than theoretical modeling when another request for dredging is raised in the future. We'll have some real information based on a study and a report. So that's with respect to the dredging. The fencing, actually, I think that Mr. Gaffney is incorrect. There's an authorization for fencing, and it may have been required by Westpoint Harbor, but it was not required by our permit. And in fact, one of the issues that is resolved by this is that we had been, one of the alleged violations was failure to install a visual barrier between the parking lot of the marina and the salt pond, and Westpoint Harbor has agreed to do that, and that's shown in the landscaping plans that are now an amendment to the permit, and there's a commitment and an obligation to do that within 8 months of the date of the permit. The no wake zone, there was a requirement in the original permit to install buoys for a no wake zone, and what the amendment authorizes is signage instead of buoys. The channel markers, the red and the green channel markers, are placed, as you may remember from the photographs, well to the they're closer to the Pacific Shores and Westpoint Harbor side of the slough. So just by the nature of how they're placed, they keep the boats farther away from there. But the our view is that the signage accomplishes the same objectives as the buoy system under the original permit. With respect to the buoys warning people to stay away from Greco Island, there had been signage. Mr. Sanders had provided evidence and that they installed signs. There was evidence that the signs had disappeared. But in the negotiations, we approached the refuge folks, and they agreed that the reinstalling the signs would be an acceptable option. And in their letter, they say that they've been in touch with Westpoint Harbor about reinstalling those signs in the coming months. So again, we think the intent of the original permit, there's no real fundamental change with respect to potential environmental impacts. The last issue is the helipad, and let me maybe just give a little background on that. The issue for us started out as when we did a site visit, there's a concrete or an asphalt pad out at the east end of the harbor, and we said, well, you need to remove this pad. It's in a public access area, and we were told by Westpoint Harbor, well, that's used occasionally for this Spartina project, so it was a past use and an occasional use. It's not a helipad. First of all, it's existing. Whatever the past history was, this pad was installed, and it had apparently been used once a year for a 3-year period 5 or 6 years ago. So we, in the negotiations, we agreed to let the pad remain. We didn't know, we got the letter from the Coastal Conservancy later, just last week or so, saying, well, they no longer need it and no longer use it. Westpoint Harbor, and they can comment if they like, but we have spoken about this, that there is actually, they would require an authorization from the Aeronautics or Aviation Division of Caltrans to operate a permanent helipad, and they don't have one. So in fact, although this permit authorizes this concrete pad for a helipad, they can't in fact operate a permanent helipad there without getting further authorizations.
But not from the commission.
Right, but I mean from the regulatory agency that really cares and will pay attention to flight paths and those issues. They would need to get that authorization to actually operate a helipad.
And then the last question is a separate question about the management of Pond 10. Can staff, the question is not just is there habitat there, but who's responsible for making sure that habitat is appropriately maintained over time?
Well, it's on Cargill's property, and Cargill said in 2003 that they would manage it and take into account water levels for birds. What they've said in 2018 is that we're going to continue to manage Pond 10 as we manage it for our own business purposes, and we are not necessarily managing it for birds. So there in fact is no real commitment or obligation on anyone to manage it in a particular way. But I think it is true, the point that was made by someone, that if that property is subsequently developed, whoever were to develop that property would need a permit from the commission as well as from the Corps of Engineers. So the opportunity to get mitigation for the loss of that habitat, should any subsequent development happen, would remain, and we would be involved in that.
But that's if someone chooses to develop it. The different question of what happens if Cargill chooses to simply manage it differently to eliminate that habitat.
Well, the answer there is that there's no hook, and that was part of the problem with this.
We don't have a permit hook to track that.
Because they're not on the permit, and that's the problem that we faced in these discussions, is that Cargill said one thing 15 years ago and they're saying something different now, but there's no mechanism because they're not on the permit. We don't have the leverage to require them to do anything different.
Small follow-up to that last discussion. I think it would be worthwhile for staff to do periodic, I don't know what the period should be, inspections out there. You're going to be doing that of Westpoint Harbor anyway, I am sure. But to make sure that part of it is you're doing it at a time when you can observe shoreline population and understand what it should be based on seasonality or time of year. Because while we may not have an enforcement mechanism, there may be some alternatives if we find there is a problem, either because Cargill has changed the way they manage it, or because they haven't managed it at all, and erosion or some other natural factors have made it less attractive to the birds.
I puzzled with this issue for quite a while, but ultimately I backed the staff not only because we were not clear enough about a requirement that I felt that an enforcement stance was appropriate, but also because it was fairly clear that the city, in approving this, and the staff in accepting the city's recommendation, had felt this was the area. Now, as a practical matter, in any future CEQA activities, this is part of the existing environment. So it gets evaluated. And the water's there, frankly, not because of any active management, but it's a pond, and it ponds rainwater, and it'll vary seasonally. But those kinds of variations, which you find around the bay and other locations not caught up in permit flights, in fact provide tremendous seasonal habitat, not by design, but by happenstance. And I just think we should recognize that. I don't think Cargill's going to go out there, buy a bunch of pumps, and pump it dry for long enough so that when there's a CEQA analysis, there won't be an existing habitat. I mean, that's just the issues that they would have to deal with in developing that site are a lot bigger than that. So I puzzled, and this is for Arthur's benefit. You know, I mean, I puzzled as to was this unacceptable concession given the context, and I concluded ultimately that it was not, and that the reliance of Westpoint Harbor on the earlier letters was in fact a reasonable accommodation, and I agreed with the staff on this one. But it's going to be wet. I mean, it's just a pond. The water can't get out.